Councillors, good morning to you all. Good morning to you all. We welcome Councillor Martin from the deep south of the city. We will commence the meeting at 9:11. Good morning to all committee members and visiting councillors. Good morning to our EGM and all our city officers here today, and of course to our wonderful support staff. We'll kick straight into things. I don't have any attendance or apologies. I have no leave of absence. We'll go to item 3, which is confirmation of the minutes. Can I seek a mover for the round 860 minutes? Councillor Doran, a seconder. Councillor Fowler. Can I briefly check no one has any concerns or questions to raise with the minutes of the previous meeting? In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Minutes of the previous meeting are carried. I'm not aware of any conflict of interest declarations. Councillor Gates.
Chairman, I don't intend making any, but because the quarterly appeals report is here, there are a few historic donations that I've received, but we're not making a decision on anything. There's nothing in the relevant term, so I thought I would just raise it with committee members to see if they're okay for me to participate in the vote.
Councillors, for the public record, we just confirm that no one has any concerns to raise for Councillor Gates. We'll keep with what we've done in the past, that it's just noting an update and there's no decisions being made. Thank you for raising that, Councillor Gates.
Thank you.
No other conflicts? In that case, we'll move to starred items. Can I seek input on which items to remain starred or adding stars? Councillor Young.
6.1, please, Mount Nathan.
6.1. Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. 6.2, 6.6 and 6.7.
Councillor Doran.
6.4, please.
Councillor O'Neill, do you have any for us today?
I'll move the start items if you want to take the motion, Chair.
Very good. Okay, so for everyone's reference, that leaves 6.3.
5.1.
5.1, 6.3, 6.8 and 6.9 as starred. Last opportunity. I have a mover of those start items in Councillor Fowler, a seconder.
I already did.
Councillor Young moved them. Councillor Fowler has seconded the start items. All those in favour? Against? That's the start items dealt with. That moves us to item 6.1.
Chair,
Mick?
can we have a brief presentation, please?
Of course, Councillor.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mick. Good morning, Gerardo. Phil, how are you? Excellent, thank you.
Through the Chair, good morning, councillors. Item 6.1 is a report that has assessed and recommends approval for a material change of use for a function facility, food and drink outlet at short-term accommodation, involving 12 units. The site's located at 41 Mount Nathan Road at Mount Nathan. The site's located it's in a rural residential zone located approximately 4 kilometres west of the Nerang town centre. It's located in an area that, while in the rural residential zone, it's kind of at the cusp of the low density residential zone, but also involves a number of other non-rural residential uses around it. There's a Silkwood school nearby, just one site removed from the subject site, although has not been included on that image, is a place of worship. It's not too far away from Parklands and the Pony Club is shown on this slide. The site actually involves an existing approved function facility, and that function facility has come about from a number of approvals to date, going back to the late 80s, and in fact there were 3 different approvals that gave rise to this particular activity. That over the years has led to some confusion about what conditions are relevant. It's making it difficult for both the applicant to function with the council to to administer. So the applicant's really looking to wrap all of this up into one condition or one approval. Part of this is also meaning that they're looking to make some expansions to the existing approval and some changes. So what we see on the slide at the moment is essentially what's there now. The buildings with the green roofs, it's probably the best way to explain them. Each one of those contains the short-term accommodation component. So there was the existing dwelling, which has been converted. It contains 3 bedrooms. There's the building that's immediately behind the marquee that contains some more short-term accommodation above the back of house facilities. And then there's that other building at the top of the image, which contains 2 short-term accommodation, and then there's a tennis court associated with that. So those 3 were established under the first approval that you can see written up on the slide. The second one brought in the marquee, which brings in the function facilities, particularly the wedding facilities functions. And then the third approval gave rise to a catering business, which was function facilities but separate to weddings in particular, but also public recreation in the form of the chapel, which allows you to provide them to provide indoor ceremonies. The chapel's not shown on that slide. It's located closer to the front of the site, adjacent to the car park, but it also gave rise to the ability to have some outdoor function space as well, or ceremony function space, which they call the croquet lawn. That's located at the bottom left-hand corner of that slide, just off the slide below where those larger umbrellas you can see. It's just down that part of the site. So the reason for this is to consolidate all of these into one approval. Because of the range of changes they're looking to do, it would have required pretty much another change to each one of those approvals. So the simpler way was to do this. So the proposed development is the function facility, which really takes up the wedding facilities that's there now. The food and drink outlet, what they are introducing, although it has been approved under a previous approval, it's not currently operating, which is the ability to have a restaurant in a separate building, which again is located out near the car park. And when functions aren't occurring, they can have that as breakfast, lunch, dinner offerings. Some short-term accommodation, so it will remove one of the existing short-term accommodation premises, but it then brings in 9 cabins, which are just individual short-term accommodation premises, and then an ancillary office. These are just some images of what's there at the moment. The chapel that we didn't see in the earlier slide is the one that's in the bottom left-hand corner, and then a range of, there's the croquet lawn, as they call it, set up there with all those chairs. So that's how the outdoor spaces and ceremonies currently function on site. Again, just a general layout of the site at the moment. So the buildings that have the yellow, orange square around there, each of the accommodation buildings. The purple is the marquee. You'll see the chapel up there in the green. So it's very much spread across the site. And at this point in time, a lot of it is towards the boundaries. Where we're looking to have predominantly the new features through this application, and what's probably been the feature that's been the most of contention, will be the short-term accommodation cabins, which feature in pretty much the bottom southern portion of the site, that kind of little dog leg that comes out to the bottom of the site. Unfortunately, this is probably not as clear as it could be, and the plans are always sort of oriented different ways, but the cluster, and I'll just point to them, that's the cluster of short-term accommodation cabins that are being proposed. Everything else, I'll mention that most other things about this proposal doesn't change. So they do have their current approval. The function facility is essentially working under those existing, for the most part, working under the existing approvals, other than for the hours of operation. The hours of operation for that particular facility are probably not consistent with contemporary hours of operation that we'd have at the moment, that we'd probably condition, but it is operating under an existing approval. In fact, the function facility, the wedding component, operates under a liquor licence. The approval doesn't have conditions in it for hours of operation. That liquor licence allows them to operate 7 days a week till midnight. The applicant is actually pulling that back a bit, and they proposed a 10 a.m. finish for Sunday through to Thursday, with all guests to leave by 10:30, and then they're looking to have till 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, with guests, if you're not staying on site, to leave by 11:30. Although that is it's not probably consistent with some of our contemporary conditioning, officers think it would be unreasonable to pull those hours back, given that they're operating that now, have probably for the last 20 years, and if they didn't take this approval up, could continue to do so. So we'll be conditioning, or the recommendation conditions, the hours of operation that they're proposing, which are the ones I just mentioned. This diagram this one really then focuses on the short-term accommodation, because it became the part of the application that for officers and the community, the submitters, was probably the more contentious component. So this diagram shows, generally speaking, where the short-term accommodation premises are looking to do. They're looking to be located, and the distance to other, the nearest surrounding residents. Of note, of the 9 that have been proposed, there are really only 3 that were of most concern. They're the ones that are the nearest to the residential, the existing residents to the south. All the other ones are really further removed and inward facing. So it's those short-term accommodation premises, which on the image to the left, you can see them labelled 1, 2 and 3. They're the ones that are nearest to existing residential development that's not in some way associated with this use. I say that because the dwelling that you see at 51.16 metres away from the nearest cabin is actually the proponent and the owner of this proposal, lives in that one. So whilst the site didn't form part of it, we think that there is a connection in some way. So the ones that are not associated with it are really the ones to the south. When this application, we'll see here that this was the submissions, and you'll see the cluster of the submissions to the south. So that's really where those the concerns came from, and a lot of those were to do with, well, apart from some of the environmental impacts, which this proposal doesn't really cause any disturbance to. Things like amenity, privacy were the real issues that came through. Just a few more random images there of the different facilities. I'll just concentrate on the short-term accommodation villas, because that's what I think we really looked at. At the time this application was lodged, each of the short-term accommodation villas had the same design. They had the large deck, which you see on the right-hand photo, which was at the back, and then smaller front deck. And that even featured for the ones that were immediately adjacent, those residential dwellings to the south. Through officer and community concerns, we had those amended so that there is now specific, I'll see it's on the slide, there are specific designs for the dwellings that immediately, and that's dwellings 1, 2 and 3, that immediately adjoin those residential dwellings to the south. And that is, they don't have that rear deck, that large rear deck, so that used to look out over those sites to the south. Removes the opportunity for congregation. It limits the opportunity for some of the, the noisier, the potential for noise of an evening when people might come back from a function and gather on that veranda. So with those changes and other changes involving screening to the boundaries, and also officers suggested that they provide more screening between the villas themselves, and that was to limit sort of interaction between guests, that we were satisfied that that was going to overcome those potential amenity impacts, both privacy and noise, on those neighbouring residents. So our recommendation is for approval, subject to the conditions that are shown in the attachment. I might just make a note that following the issue of the agenda, officers have had some discussion with the area council about another concern that didn't really feature through the objections, but it's one that he's aware of, and that's fireworks. So apparently in the past, fireworks have been, whatever the word might be, they've had fireworks at the premises. So we're looking to control that, so to put some control around that. And we've come up with some amended conditions, and in particular conditions 5 and 7 is the suggestions that we have got. So conditions, councillors, condition on page 85 of the agenda, you'll see conditions 5 and 7. Condition 5 talks about an operational management plan. So that's requiring them to prepare an operational management plan that includes a number of things, and we recommend putting in another Roman numeral 5 into that, and I think the words are coming up on the screen, which just requires them within their operational management plan to document that they have to secure all relevant approvals from the administrative authority before they have any fireworks, but also probably more importantly, well, probably equally importantly, is that they also have to publicly notify on their website in advance of any event that is going to feature fireworks. And then we also recommend condition 7, which is just the scope of approval conditions that sit there for, I guess, for all to see, is that there's a limit on the amount of events that they can have in one calendar year. We've chosen 8 in consultation. I'm not really sure how frequently they occur, but we've chosen that as options. So with those changes, we're satisfied that we've covered off on all the issues that we feel might have been of a concern, and we're recommending approval.
If we can, so I'm happy to move the item with those amendments as proposed by officers in consultation with the Divisional Councillor. And while we let our chamber team get that changed recommendation up on the screen, do we have questions for officers at all? Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Phil. The fireworks, were they part of one of the previous approvals that they were allowed to have fireworks?
Through the Chair, I didn't see them feature. I guess I can't say with absolute certainty that, but I don't recall them through any of the conditions about fireworks being on site. A lot of the conditions, especially of the earlier ones, they weren't real detailed, in all honesty, and that's why they didn't even include hours of operation. So I don't recall them. I'd have to check with certainty though.
Why I'm asking is that I know that a function centre in my area was not allowed to have fireworks at all. So that's why I'm thinking that this is sort of part of that they've been allowed, proposed to have them on this one, and it might have been the last one. So I'm just wondering why the difference. It's rural area.
Could we, as a takeaway for council or just for Councillor O'Neill's information, I can't actually think what provisions in our planning scheme cover fireworks at these facilities. If officers could provide a memo to councillors on if there actually is anything in the planning scheme at all that talks to fireworks or what provision that might fall under.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's nothing specific. We do have obviously noise criteria, but it's not, fireworks sort of flies under the radar. It is a general amenity consideration. So further to Councillor O'Neill's point, we don't know the circumstances of the function centre in your area. It might have been a later one than Coolabah Downs. This particular operation's been operating for close to 30 years. It, as Phil said, there were very, very loose approvals then that didn't actually cover devil in the detail stuff like we do now. So we're now, I think regulating fireworks is an appropriate condition.
Councillor Young.
So my understanding is there's no regulation on the use of fireworks on the site previously, and that meant that the owner could go to the Department of Environment Resource Management and secure a permit to conduct fireworks. So in the belief that that's still their right, we're just seeking to impose a limitation on that.
Thank you for that bit of extra detail, Councillor Young. Any other questions for officers before I seek a seconder for my change recommendation? Councillor Gates is happy to second. I'll speak to the item very briefly, just to say that I actually really read this report with great interest, because it is a site that's been operating for quite a long time under several historical approvals. And I think Mr. Sharp puts it in pretty good terms that there were some fairly loose conditions when some of those original approvals were had, which is fine. They were legal at the day. But the fact that we've seen what I think is a really positive outcome, where everything is wrapped up in one new approval, contemporary conditions apply that will make it a lot easier, one, for the community to understand what can and can't happen, but will make it a hell of a lot easier for our development compliance section to take action if needed, and we hope they don't need to. Just I think there's a really good outcome there, and I wanted to acknowledge in Phil's report as well that I thought the level of detail and consideration to the concerns raised by submitters was really well responded to, and that there was obviously a lot of thought put into that. Is there a speaker against the motion? Councillor Young, as Divisional Councillor, before the opportunity to contribute.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to speak to the motion in favour of the motion. I'm pretty comfortable with the recommendations, and I'm very thankful to the officers for their sincere consideration of the public concerns, or the concerns expressed by the submitters. I think they've responded to those really well, and so has the applicant. They've adopted and accommodated those changes, and I think we've seen the most of those in the form of the new dwellings, shall we say, whereby the big veranda or deck area at the rear, or facing towards those adjacent properties, has been removed entirely, and the glass will be frosted. There's restrictions on the operational hours. There's lots of good conditions about movement of traffic and the operations all entirely. And I think everyone's done a really good job attending to all these problems. So I am comfortable to see the matter go ahead. It's been well run. It's been there for a long time, as you say. This gives us an opportunity to regulate all of the conditions in one package and achieve a good outcome. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. It takes us to item 6.2. Phil, thank you. Brownie, welcome. Councillor Martin will take a presentation on 6.2.
Yes, please.
Over to you when you're ready, Adam.
Presenting to you today is over 1053 and 1055 Gold Coast Highway, Palm Beach. It's an impact accessible material change of use application for 69 multiple dwelling units. As you can see on the slide here, the site is located between the Gold Coast Highway and Jefferson Lane on the coastal corridor of Palm Beach. The slide here, you can see the site is represented by the yellow star just to the east of the Palm Beach Centre Zone next to the beach, so well located to that centre and all the services that centre zones provide. Here's a few pictures of the development from its Jefferson Lane and Gold Coast Highway frontage. As you can see, we've got a lot of glazing and open balconies orientated towards the east for Jefferson Lane, and a well-articulated frontage to Gold Coast Highway, obviously a lot less glazing, some recessed upper levels at the top, and a fairly landscaped base that you can see on both of those images there. This development is subject to the uplift test provisions within City Plan because it exceeds the 29 metre code accessible building height. The development is proposing 13 stories and 43.3 metres, and that area in red on the slide you can see there is what is above the code accessible height threshold. Looking at the Jefferson Lane frontage that we can see here, that's our vehicle entry point to the development. It's got a 2-storey void there to allow for removalist vehicle and servicing, and it's also got a separate pedestrian entry point there. A very heavily landscaped frontage to Jefferson Lane, probably one of the better ones, I would say, that we've seen in recent times. Similarly, the Gold Coast Highway frontage is also fairly well vegetated. It's got a clear pedestrian entrance you can see there. And it's actually got 3 dwellings that orientate out towards the Gold Coast Highway, as you can see there, before we get into the tower form with the strong horizontal banding and some well-articulated frontage there. The slide we can see here we're looking at is the whole length of Palm Beach. You can see the blue line that denotes the 29-metre code accessible height overlay that exists all the way along the front of Palm Beach. Looking to the bottom half of that slide, we can identify the yellow character analysis area, and in the centre of that we can see the site with a red square or dot. And if you look really hard, you can see the area where the code accessible height is 39 metres, slightly to the west of that red dot, which constitutes the centre zone within Palm Beach. Looking at that area a little closer in a bit more detail, we can see the yellow outline of the character area, a blue outline of a more immediate character area that the applicant used for their character analysis, but council officers used the wider yellow one. What you can see there is the slide in the middle, the site in the middle with the red rectangle, and a series of green and red circles. The green circles are developments that are in a tower form that are below or equal to the 29-metre code accessible building height, and the ones in red are developments that exceed the 29-metre building height. So what that's telling us there is that there's quite a lot of towers, as we're all aware of, along the front of Palm Beach, and as you can see there's even some starting to pop up now in the centre zone of Palm Beach to the west, which are higher than the 29-metre code accessible building height. This is another representation of that slide, and perhaps one I think that's a good slide to talk to. Our site you can see here is the brown building. The yellow buildings around it depict 29-metre code accessible height buildings, and the greeny bluey colours are developments over that 29-metre code height. You can see one immediately to the east at 71 to 73 Jefferson Lane that is at 43.2 metres, so very comparable to the subject site. Within that red dotted area is the centre zone of Palm Beach, and as you can see there are some substantially taller towers there in the order of 58 to 60 metres. Council officers have actually had some more developments proposed or lodged within that centre zone since this slide was created. So we've got some more taller towers there. I do also need to point out that the site to the immediate south of the subject site that's identified in yellow as a code accessible building currently has an other change application that officers are assessing that's proposing additional building height. This is the DA that's proposed to the south that we'll be presenting to you at the last City Planning Committee of the year. That's looking for full uplift height as well. This is a slide looking at the coastal cross-section from Cypress Terrace, and what it's trying to depict is you can see on the right-hand side the 29-metre buildings depicted by the black and yellow outlines. We've got our site again in brown, and then those green ones you can see to the left are the circa 60-metre high sites in the centre zone. So the key thing I'm trying to demonstrate from this side is that even though we are at a 33.5 metre building height, we're not competing with those centre zone sites. They're still the dominant tower form, and our tower and the heights proposed doesn't look out of place and provides quite a ordered and varied skyline. The applicant provided some photo montages as part of their application package. If you can't see those, I think they're on page 309 of your agenda today. Sorry. 395 would be those pages. What it demonstrates there is, as you can see along the top, looking north along the Gold Coast Highway, you're looking on the eastern side, not that sort of whited out tower to the west. But the towers sort of blends well with the existing towers. When you're driving up the highway in Palm Beach, you're not far from a tower wherever you are. There's towers straddling both sides of the highway, and to the south as well. But probably what I'm trying to demonstrate is that this tower fits in with those towers. It doesn't look out of place, even though it is slightly higher than some of those code accessible towers. Getting to the development plans themselves, we've got 2 levels of basement, 4.5 metres road widening taken from the Gold Coast Highway frontage and the 1.5 metres from Jefferson Lane. We've got our vehicle access, as we can see there, from Jefferson Lane. The upper ground floor orientates towards the Gold Coast Highway, and those are those 3 units I mentioned that look out and provide some activation to the Gold Coast Highway frontage. Getting into the tower form, we can see a pretty well articulated building along those side elevations, broken up into 3 sort of slender forms. Pinch points, and they are pinch points, to 3 metres to those balcony edges, with a building line more consistent with a 4 metre setback. Some of those deeper recesses are getting to 6.5 metres. So we've got a really well articulated building and some good separation to neighbouring developments. As you move up to levels 11 and 12, those setbacks increase, and we have a more recessed 2 upper levels, 11 and 12 there, to reduce the dominance of that height and make the building appear a bit less intense. Getting onto the submitters, we received 7 properly made submissions and 2 not properly made. The majority of those submissions were to the north of the site, as you can see, and 1 a bit further to the south. The submitters raised the following issues: inconsistency with the strategic framework, impact on nearby development and reasonable amenity expectations, lack of infrastructure or the size of Jefferson Lane and the ability for it to support this type of development, planning need, excellent standard of appearance and no public benefit being provided, and light rail considerations. Officers took into consideration all those submissions that we did receive, but there was nothing in there that required us to make any substantial changes or change our recommendation. So officers' recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions that you will find on 308 of this agenda today.
Adam, thank you. Councillor Patterson, did your hand shoot up in amongst that? Do you have a question?
Yes, it did. Thank you, Chair. Through you, it's kind of a general question, but when we have a tall tower and it's proposed in a place where there aren't any, where it's talked about the need for varied skyline and that we have it because of varied skyline, this isn't looking particularly varied. And I'm wondering, what do we do on that when, as you said, there's a lot, like a bank of towers? Do we have any capacity to influence that, given you are actually talking about one individual assessment where property owners have rights for that property? But if we create effectively a bank of a certain height along that highway, what can we do about that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps that picture there might be a good one, Councillor, to talk to. In terms of, you're correct, there are a lot of developments there that are a code accessible height, but we've got some that are proposing the uplift through the uplift provisions of the scheme. And I would suggest that the market dictates that not everyone goes for that uplift test provision, and through that mechanism we are getting a combination of code and impact building heights that is contributing to that varied building height along Palm Beach. And obviously you've got the centre zone to the west where heights are even higher. Code accessible heights are almost 40 metres, so you're getting some more variation there.
Brownie, that particular test, sorry, that's rude to me, Adam, that particular test doesn't strictly only apply to height and metres, but doesn't also take in the design of the roof of the building as being part of the varied, that, you know, we don't want to see everything the same height, but we also don't want to see everything with a flat roof in it, but that's part of the varied part of the skyline as well.
Through the Chair, that's correct also. We try and strive to make buildings look individual and not consistent with other developments around. As part of the high-rise accommodation code, there's also provisions for roof cap and interesting skyline elements to contribute to that variety.
Councillor Gates.
Can I ask if we're aware whether the applicant tried to acquire that little block between the yellow and the brown?
Through the chair, I don't have anything written in that space, but I understand they did try to acquire that small little house to the north.
And I don't think they objected to the building. Am I correct in that?
Through the chair, they had some concerns or queries in relation to stormwater flows because they've got a bit of a slope down from the Gold Coast Highway down to their rear yard. We liaised with the applicant through the process. That was before the public notification period. And we were able to amend the stormwater management plan proposed by the developer. And consequently, that house to the north didn't lodge a submission because they were comfortable with the outcome that we resolved through the assessment.
Thank you, Adam.
Councillor Young.
Thanks, Chair. I wonder, are there any conditions that restrict owners of the individual units from converting media rooms into habitable spaces, please?
Through the chair, there is conditions to that effect. If I go to a floor plan for you, oops, I've gone the wrong way. You will see there are some rooms towards the edge of the building. Probably two I can see are in that middle section there where you've got a lounge room and then a small room immediately next to it. At one point in time, they were slightly larger and were more walled in, and we advised the applicant that we'd determine those as bedrooms unless they changed the configuration and the shape. So what we achieved through that negotiation was a minimum east to west width of 2.5 metres, and it must be open. So there are some conditions in there. Condition 5, studies and/or multi-purpose rooms on page 310. So that they must not be converted into bedrooms at any time.
And through you, Mr. Chair, on page 335, we also have a property notification. So this is about moving forward into the future with prospective purchases. And the property notification B, studies and/or multi-purpose rooms shall not be converted into bedrooms. So that sort of covers it through a condition as well as a property notification.
Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a couple of questions. Does the application meet the car parking ratio that's required?
Through the chair, on page 297 of your agenda today, the application was required to provide 94 resident car parks and 9 visitors. They've provided 100 resident car parks and 9 visitors, so they are exceeding the AO requirements for car parking.
Thanks, Adam. Part of one of the submitter objections was on the screen a little earlier said light rail considerations. Can you expand on what that objection was and what the city officer, what that means?
Yes, I think the submitter was in relation to utilising the light rail coming through this part of the city to justify an increase in density. If you have a look at our response to that submission, I can tell you in general terms we said council officers haven't taken into consideration the light rail provisions on the basis that the light rail overlay doesn't extend this far down south to Palm Beach, so it hasn't been a factor in officers' consideration of this development.
What's the light rail overlay?
The light rail overlay exists towards, I think it's around Broadbeach is where it currently stops at the moment. It increases density and yield and reduces car parking where you're in proximity to the light rail, and at the moment it sort of stops a bit further north of Palm Beach.
Great, thank you. I noticed in the design, and it's varied in the western side of the Gold Coast Highway, some developments have street activation with some retail shops at the front interfacing with the street, and some don't. Presumably there's no requirement for street activation on any overlay or code in this particular area, because this one has bedrooms facing the Gold Coast Highway or apartments.
Yeah, through the chair, we're in the medium density residential zone here, so there was some historic development that had commercial sort of design outcomes on that side of the highway through the former 2003 planning scheme. They don't exist anymore, so there are some developments, you're right, on the corner of Palm Beach Avenue there that have ground level commercial outcomes. It's not a requirement of the scheme, but we would probably argue that those 3 units that they've got that face the Gold Coast Highway are a little bit unique. We don't often see towers doing that, and that provides a good level of activation and surveillance of the Gold Coast Highway frontage.
So it's a commercial decision essentially by the applicant. There's no code that requires it. I suppose the question is it in the context of a 50% uplift provision, when we look at the specific outcomes required in order to obtain the 50%, I just want to park the retail for a second and just ask city officers that along the journey of this application, has the city officers obtained any improvements to the design, or that along that journey of what would be a long time with city officers that can be pointed to as a win for the community in return for activating the provision under 3.3.2.19?
Through the chair, the uplift provisions don't have a public benefit requirement, so there's no requirement for them to provide a community benefit per se as part of those uplift test provisions. We worked with the developer and their architects to improve overall building appearance. I think we worked hard to get that recessive upper level and some changes in the building design through there. Landscaping improvements at the ground level. So there's a range of small or myriad of things that we worked through as part of the assessment process to get a higher standard of development that we think is worthy of the uplift test provisions.
Just a couple more, Chair. So when it talks about an excellent standard of appearance of the built form and street edge, is it right for me to assume that throughout the journey, the design that's been put forward to us in the committee pack is a much improved version of what you first saw in the first meeting with the applicants, and therefore that journey has improved along the way? Is that what you're saying, Adam?
Through the chair, that's correct, Councillor. I haven't got any images in my presentation in terms of when it was first lodged to when we're now presenting to you today, but there would have been gradual and small improvements as a result of council officers trying to improve a lot of those outcomes. In terms of that built form and street edge, was probably a lot of landscaping we were really trying to improve on. And both frontages have got a very good landscaped podium base.
One last question, Chair, but thank you. Just a comment from me before that question is, I think sometimes it's good to see that journey in the improvement on the way through. Chair, this might not be specific to this development, but one of the conditions talks to the waste chutes, and it's got provision protection for waste storage room. I won't read it all, but essentially it allows for a chute diverter system for recycling waste as well as general waste. And a high-level question to the planning team, I guess, is it time for us to start including a FOGO element or food organics element for our multi-unit residential developments, given the future desires of the city to increase our food organics waste? Is that something that, not for this application, but could take on notice as something we should consider potentially in our waste chutes conditions moving forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could talk on behalf of the City Planning Branch, it's probably a matter that we would have to take on notice, Councillor Doran, for the new scheme, because it would have to come into a code, yeah.
Questions for officers? Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Question through you. So that looking at the character analysis, I think you've got a page of the sort of the reference area. The centre zone, I suppose, is interesting given they have very different densities, very different heights. So in the current location of the site, the 29 metres full maximum uplift, I think, takes us to 43.5. Just confirming there's no ability to go beyond that 50% uplift. Just wondering if you can confirm what the height is in the centre zone, the maximum height.
Through the chair, the maximum code accessible building height in the centre zone is 39 metres, so it's 10 metres higher than the medium density residential zone to the east. But the key difference between the centre zone and the medium density residential zone is there is no upper limit on the centre zone building height. So the medium density residential zone, as we know, is capped at 50%, so you're only ever going to get to 43.5 metres unless you're going above that, which introduces more conflicts with city plan strategic framework assessment benchmarks. The centre zone doesn't have those. It has the same 8 provisions of the 9, and it doesn't have a 50% cap. So technically, you could go as high as you want in the centre zone.
So it's unlimited in the centre zone in that blue.
Probably dictated by car parking usually.
So following on from that, I suppose looking at the other transect, I think you've got looking from west to east. It includes the centre zone, which we've talked about has that higher height limit. Wait for you to get it up. Yeah, this one here. So I'm just sort of seeking to confirm, because it's obviously the proposal's the brown building. So, you know, if I look at buildings here, it sort of paints a picture of consistency. But I think if I look, the 3 largest buildings in the middle, if I'm not correct, they're in the centre zone. So they're in the kind of the unlimited height area. So we minus those, and I think the one on the far left, and I don't want to breach confidential, I believe that is not approved. That has been revoked since there has been appeals. So that's the 1101 Gold Coast Highway on the far left. So if I look at the right of the picture, we're looking at sort of east of the Gold Coast Highway. It's those yellow buildings, the brown building. And so I guess my question is, that looks significantly higher, does seem to appear out of place in the context of the medium density residential zone. I know you noted there was one on the beach side that was approved, but is lower, and the natural ground is a lot lower. So I'm just seeking, I guess, a response on how that doesn't seem, this will be the tallest building in that area of that relevant zone, how that wouldn't be out of place.
Through the chair, there is an ability for developments to get the uplift test if they push to go and be tested against those uplift test provisions. I think there's an order there in terms of the upper limit, and they're at that certainly at 43.5 square metres. I think it's actually probably better for the skyline of Palm Beach, to be completely honest, to have some variation in the building height instead of a homogeneous 29-metre code accessible building height where all developments are at the same level. That's not contributing to an interesting skyline. If you take direction from some of the higher order provisions within the strategic framework, namely 3.2.2, which talks about city shape and transformation, it talks to the consolidation area and those urban areas of the city having to do the heavy lifting in terms of increasing population growth. That's where 2/3 of our population growth will occur, and 1/3 will occur up in those other expansion areas. So it's contemplating high intensity outcomes in those areas, and as part of that contemplation of intensity, you may need to go up a bit. So if you're looking at the strategic framework as a whole, it's providing a bit of a guidance to say that, hey, the local identity and sense of place is probably more focused on the planned and emerging character as opposed to the existing character. So when you factor all those things in consideration, the fact that they're within the building height uplift test provisions, they've met the assessment benchmarks that we think they're required to meet to satisfy the uplift. The city plan contemplates and officers agree that this outcome is consistent with the local identity and sense of place for the area.
Thank you. Chair, on the DTMR, I think, referral, I think it's pad mount transformer with an exclusion zone, and just noticed that expands over to the neighbouring site. Just wondering if you could touch on, is there any impacts on the house to the north with that marked zone? Yeah, that image there. In the top left, it seems to span sort of a couple of metres over.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. As you can see there, the PMT on the top left has a blast exclusion zone. You can't build anything within 4 metres of a pad mount transformer unless you have an increased engineering standard of walls. As you can see there on that slide, the 4 metres basically just touches the building next door. There's a driveway that exists between the two that allows them to get to the car parking at the rear. So no issues at the moment, but if they were to have something in that area there, they may need to have a wall or some sort of engineering construction along the boundary interface that might protect anything they're putting in there.
So if we could just follow on from that. So I think the current application that we're looking at, there's some of the setbacks, not at the pad mount transformer. I think one of the setbacks is just over 1 metre. So if that 2-storey house is looking to build something higher, or even a 2-storey house in a similar setback, like 1 metre, this would prohibit that. They couldn't build a dwelling because, as I understand it, the AO for a side setback at that ground level is that 1.5 metres. So this would impact the neighbour's development ability.
Through the chair, that's correct. The code accessible or the deemed to comply side setback at ground level is 1.5 metres. They've got their access that goes down there, which is a driveway, so they're required to maintain that for car parking purposes, which would be a minimum of 3 metres wide to get a single driveway. That's currently at 4 metres, so if they want to change their arrangement and put something closer to the boundary, it wouldn't prohibit them from doing that, Councillor Martin, but it would certainly require them to have some sort of consideration of that pad mount transformer to ensure that they're maintaining a safe outcome. We quite consistently see pad mount transformers shifted to the side and frontage of development, so it's an outcome that occurs throughout the city everywhere. I haven't come across a situation yet where someone's been precluded from building to their AO compliant setbacks next door, as long as we have an appropriate engineering solution in place.
Thank you. 2 more questions, Chair. In the report, it talked about there's no significant vegetation, and I noticed there's a street tree, a tuckaroo that's established on the verge that will be retained, save for it is in the DTMR corridor. But in some of the images there is a mature existing significant palm tree which mirrors the ones on the Gold Coast Highway, and so just seeking, is that being retained? If not, why not?
Through the chair, I'm not sure you'll get that detail on the plans. Let's have a quick look. You were referring to the Jefferson Lane frontage or the Gold Coast?
To the Gold Coast Highway. It would be sort of the equivalent of 3 stories, and I'd draw councillors' attention to, if it's not on your slide deck, there's images in the pack.
Through the chair, there is an existing street tree that you could see there on the Gold Coast Highway side, just to the right of the Gold Coast Highway wording. That may be the tree you're talking about. That's outside the site. So that's not proposed to be removed as part of this development application.
No, sorry, Adam. So that tree on the Gold Coast Highway, that's, as I understand it, that's the verge tree. That's the tuckaroo.
Right.
But there is an image on, sorry,
34.
Grab our packs. You could go to page 234. And you can see it also on 235. It's at a height of our centre median palms.
Through the chair, I can see that image you're referring to, Councillor Martin, on page 234.
Yeah.
I believe that tree is going, but I'll have to confirm that. I can't give you a 100% answer on it.
yeah, look, it's set quite far forward, as you can see there in the image. So really seeking to understand that, and so the report said there's no significant vegetation. That seems like a very mature tree. I'd say 20, 30 years old. Would that not be normally considered a significant tree?
Through the chair, I acknowledge that it is an established tree on the site there. Significant vegetation in the city can have some of those factors. I think in this consideration, given the landscaping that they're proposing to provide as part of the development outcome, with two very heavily landscaped frontages, they have got some trees proposed, that even if this one was to go, we're probably getting a net gain of landscaping outcome with this proposed statement of landscape intent that will be put forward as part of this development application. I can certainly take that on notice, though, to confirm before full council if that tree is in fact going or if there's any ability to retain it.
Thanks, Chair. And final question. I won't labour the point around. I think colleagues know the view on the uplift test, but just finally, so in amendments 2 and 3, we had an area that was looked to lower heights. Just seeking to confirm this location was within that area, that there was a previous resolution to lower the heights that wasn't adopted by the state. Just seeking confirmation this is in that zone.
Through the chair, my recollection was the heights that were proposed to be dropped as part of 2 and 3 were on the eastern side of Jefferson Lane as opposed to the western side.
That's my recollection as well.
Chair, if I could correct, I think there was both. There was a lowering of east of Jefferson, which was lower, but there was also a lowering of east of the Gold Coast Highway, which was a couple of metres higher, but overall, everything east of the Gold Coast Highway had a lowering.
So, Councillor, you've raised the amendments, which no longer exist. So is there a point to your question or content?
Just seeking confirmation. That was
so you can save that for debate. Is there any further questions for officers? In that case, I'll move the item and seek a seconder. Councillor O'Neill, thank you for that. I'll speak very briefly to it so we can continue on. What wasn't pointed out in the presentation, but I think is fairly key in this site, is that it's an amalgamation of 2 blocks that creates an 1,800 square metre block, which is a really superior outcome that I think we'd all agree we'd love to see more of around the city, is amalgamation of big blocks like this, because it allows much better outcomes to occur. On that 1,800 square metre block, we see 69 dwellings proposed with 109 car parks. So it's a little bit over the required amount of car parking, which is always a great outcome. And again, one of those benefits when you get a larger block with this kind of street frontage. There was a fair bit of focus in the presentation on the design of the building, and this is one of the most strongly articulated buildings I think we've seen in some time, where we've got 3 metre pinch points right on the edge of outermost projections of boundaries of balconies, but for the majority of the building it's a 4.5 up to 6.5 metre setback, which again is one of those great outcomes when a developer can amalgamate 2 sites, that you can get that kind of articulation, which helps with privacy and creating interesting buildings instead of everything being boxes. While not mentioned in the presentation, but I did note in the report that $1.8 million in infrastructure charges as well. I saw it raised in a couple of the local community groups down there, suggesting that there was no infrastructure charges that come with this. That's incorrect. It's 1.8 million is the draft infrastructure charges notice. And I think for me, the ultimate on this one is 6 objections. It's been through public notification. The community's had their chance to have their say, and with only 6 objections raised, I believe would demonstrate community intent that this is supported. That a bigger site, a well-designed building in the right location, that for me, if you look at what's existing on the site to what's proposed, will be a superior outcome along that corridor. Speaker against the motion. Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I think looking at this site, obviously this will become the tallest building in the medium density residential zone. It's in an area, whilst I acknowledge it's close to the CB, the centre zone, it's not, and it has a different zoning and different character. We have seen planning court appeals that have been overturned in a similar character assessment area in a similar position, both for and against. And I think it's clearly the community have voiced concerns. I mean, I acknowledge that amendments 2 and 3 are not on currently resolved, but it was the community's intent that be delivered on. The application density, aside from height, we are going full maximum uplift height, where there's no neighbouring properties are lower, either 29 metres or, directly to the north, 2 stories, which I really feel for that block being quite hemmed in there. But, of this site, the density, which is currently zone 1 per 25 square metres, is 1 per 10.5. But for context, so 73 bedrooms is designed for the area, and we've got 169. I'm concerned about the Padman transformer, and I acknowledge there's it's designed the way it is, and it goes right up to the boundary. But I can't see how we can sign on that this application would potentially limit the development potential of the neighbouring site to have a similar, or even the AO compliant setbacks. I acknowledge the comment around city shape, and if we look at our city plan, whole of city, around what is the future intent of the area. But we've looked at city shape before. Palm Beach is specifically high rises are excluded. Thereby, the most intense outcomes are excluded from the city shape provision of the city plan. So I don't believe it's an area that is anticipated for the high intensity outside of the centre zone. It's anticipated for medium intensity and medium rise. Lastly, I'll just touch on objections. I note there was lower objections than normal, but I speak to residents every single day. There's been thousands and thousands of objections, and they haven't led to successful outcomes in the community's eyes. So I don't blame them if they have somewhat disengaged from the objection process. I would encourage them to still make objections if they feel this way, but I don't take it, knowing that I'm speaking to my community, knowing the feedback I'm getting, I don't take it as carte blanche support. So for that reason, I'll be voting against.
Speaker for the motion. Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. It'll be quite a broad contribution here. I'm supporting the application. I think the officers have put forward a pretty reasoned approach as to why this complies with the city plan of 2016. And I think that one of the difficulties in this committee is we have a local councillor who is working really hard to represent the views of the community down there in Palm Beach, and it just seems like he is voicing every concern that is raised by the community down there, whether it's via submission, whether it's via directly to him, because I know that talking to him a bit, he gets the direct feedback, some of it a bit rough too. And so we sit here in committee and we've got to, as elected officials, we have to balance the legal framework with which officers have to assess these applications against the local councillor who's voicing a community concern that says potentially the 2016 plan's a little out of step with a 2025 community. And he's their best representation of what their community wants to see. And in a perfect world, that representation would be reflected, but we have a statutory requirement to measure these things against a legislative framework. And there's a real disconnect there, and we feel it every single time we have a planning meeting where a Palm Beach application comes up, Chair. And so, I've asked some questions today. It's always important to me that the city assess the appropriate level of parking. I do think that in an important location like this, some street activation is preferable, but it's not required. So that's my personal requirement, but it's not something that I can impose as a condition. And I think this push and pull between what we'd like to see versus what we have to measure against is something that really comes to bear when a Palm Beach application comes in. And I really feel for Councillor Martin, because he is doing so much to make sure his community's voices are heard, but against the tide of a statutory framework, it's really difficult to side with the feelings and the emotion that's down there. And so, Chair, it's my hope that that this push and pull with what the community expects down in that area, voiced by their very strong representation here in the chamber, is reflected in the next body of work that we do on the city plan. You know, because it's a document that would have been prepared from 2014 and 15 and adopted in 16, and it's now 2025. We're working towards one in 2028. And so, yeah, it's probably out of date and not reflective of the community, but I think it's important that we acknowledge that Councillor Martin is reflective of his community and he's reflecting their views here. And it's difficult for us because we don't want to place the city at a financial burden trying to defend something that is not defendable against the statutory framework. And so I hope that the next body of work where Councillor Martin's involved in reflecting the view of what the future of Palm Beach looks like includes their vision and their voice, and I know that they are. But as of today, I'm going to vote for the application because it's aligned with the city plan and the provisions therein. And I think that's the difficulty here in this planning committee. And I hope that the immense work that we're doing on the new city plan reflects that moving forward. So.
Speaker against the motion. In that case, I will close debate. Councillor Martin raised the residential density that applies in this area of 1 per 25. We regularly see most applications in the medium density zone are closer to that 1 per 10, 1 per 13, sometimes even a little bit lower. So I'm not fazed by that at all. It just reflects what every application I can remember in recent history has shown in the medium density zone of being the appropriate density. And I think we've already signalled as part of the new planning scheme that we'll probably adjust those densities to reflect what the market is actually delivering, what is expected in these areas. Councillor Martin also raised the city shaping element, talking about where high-rises are proposed. I believe we've run this one to ground before and had it debugged by officers that that's not a comprehensive list of every suburb on the Gold Coast where a tower form isn't expected, and that the broader intent of that city shaping piece is actually the reference to looking at the entire coastline and context, not just one suburb, of which it saw suburbs like Southport, Surfers Paradise, Broadbeach having the tallest towers, Coolangatta at the other end, and that in between there would be a mix of heights in between. When we are approving 300-metre towers in Surfers Paradise, 400-metre towers in Southport now, and we're looking at a 43-metre high tower in Palm Beach, I actually believe we're meeting what the intent of when that provision was put in the city plan of what our expanded coastline would look like in that space. The reference to the 50% and the heights, I would much prefer to be giving 50% on an 1,800 square metre site than 50% on a 400 metre site. This is where this should be occurring. So if there are changes to occur in a new planning scheme, I definitely think focusing on not having 400 square metre sites, of which Councillor Martin referenced one of those, getting 50% or height uplift provisions in the future would be a great outcome. But I would actually disagree that on sites where a developer amalgamates and nearly an 1,800 square metre site, which is a big site, that we should be a little bit more open to allowing 101 planning principles dictate what occurs on there to get those different heights and variations. Because as clearly shown with this one, when you get that amalgamation of a bigger site, we don't have as tight as setbacks. It gives the architect the opportunity to get a little bit more articulation into the building, which on this one we see an average 4.5 metre setback around the building, up to 6 metres at some point, and that interest by having some of the pinch points on the balconies. It also means that basements are not as tight, so it's easy for the applicant to actually exceed the existing compliant car parking outcome for the area. I generally do believe this is a great outcome. I think it is a good-looking building. It is well placed in a great location and will add to the street amenity when it gets built, which we hope it does. I will close debate with that and take the vote. All those in favour of the application? Division is called. Luckily, I was nearly going to call your name straight away. In favour, Councillor Hamill, Councillor Young, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Gates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Doran, Councillor O'Neill. Against, Councillor Martin. The motion is carried. Adam, thank you very much. Councillors, we will move to item 6.4. Rachel, Sean, good morning to you both. The second of the mustache duo is here. Councillor Doran, I believe you had the question on item 6.4.
Thank you. Just one, Chair. I think it's our second time we've had the quarterly in this term. We've had them come through, and I just wanted to
Third, yep.
Well, Councillor Gates is always there to make sure we're accurate. And I think from a personal perspective, I welcome them. I think it's really good for us to get insight into what's happening. My question is it possible, through you, Chair, that we could either have a look at the pros and cons of doing this, or whether it's possible to do this, have a running year-to-date tally on the cost to the city for defending appeals that are made in this body, not a line-by-line per application, but so that we can get some context around how much we're spending and the great work that's done by this team. But so that I think the city would be beneficial for the city and the community to know how much we spend as a city defending or taking a position on these matters.
We might go to the EGM for this one before I open it up.
Through you, Mr Chair, Councillor Doran, happy to look into that. There's definitely a way that we could do it. It might not always be accurate given the timing of things, but it'll be pretty close to, and I think where it's not, we'll provide a little disclaimer at that point in time. So happy to take that on board for the next report.
Councillor Neal, was that a question? Councillor Martin, question?
Just seeking detail of one of the appeals, so I don't know if it's on confidential. One of them being resolved. I was just seeking the outcome of one of them.
So telling us the address definitely isn't
it's
confidential.
1101 Gold Coast Highway and 112 Jefferson Lane, Palm Beach.
So I think we can give the update of what the court order pointed to.
Through the Chair, that's the Alison St Clair Crawford matter. Yes. Through the Chair, the developer chose to withdraw from the appeal. They didn't want to defend the decision, and so they allowed an order through the court that discontinued the proceedings.
Please.
So because that was an impact application that came through committee, so that now is off the table and it reverts back to the prior approval, the code approval, or was it new?
Through the
plan?
Chair, yes, it does revert back to the code approval.
Any other questions? A little bit in line with Councillor Doran's thinking a little bit, it is the third time we've had this come back through committee, not seeking for it today, but if individual councillors had any feedback on if they're happy with the level of detail in these reports, if they're seeking more or less, if they feel like you're getting from this report what you wanted, if you wouldn't mind sending that feedback through to Mick and Rachel, just so we can make sure that as we continue on, they keep to reflect what the intent was and what the information you were seeking. But I agree with Councillor Doran's point. I actually think that'd be a good and timely addition so we can see how it all tracks together. Seek a mover for the item. Sorry. Oh, was there a question or no? Councillor Patterson's happy to move. Councillor Young, happy to second. Councillor Patterson wishes to speak to the item. In that case, we'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? Motion carried unanimous. Team, thank you very much. Councillors, could I suggest before we go to item 6.5 that we take a 10-minute break? Meeting adjourned for 10 minutes. Councillors, the live streaming is back on. We will resume the meeting at 10:39. We are up to item 6.5. Good morning, Luke and team.
Through the chair. Good morning. My name is Sienna Lawson. I'm the Enforcement Review Lead, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this report on the city's regulatory approach to long-term parking of trailers, boats and caravans on local and state roads to you. The purpose of this report is to outline the city's regulatory options available to address caravans, boats and trailers that are parked long-term on local or state-controlled roads, outline the enforcement approaches available to the city, and present the 7 regulatory options identified for this report. As the Council is aware, the City receives ongoing complaints about long-term parking of registered caravans, boats and trailers under 7.5 metres on residential streets. Since 2011, Council has written to state ministers and the Premier requesting changes to the road rules that would allow us to classify these vehicles and impose time limits. All proposals were declined. Concerns raised by the state include impact on tourism, registration and licensing frameworks, and the existing enforcement powers under road rules were deemed sufficient. In 2019, Council amended Local Law No. 2 after consultation with the Ombudsman to align with TORUM, removing previous provisions for vehicle under 7.5 metres in length. Enforcement is now limited to the vehicle is unregistered, it exceeds 7.5 metres in length, or it is parked in an area with time-limited signage or designated traffic areas. Outside these conditions, long-term parking is legally allowed. Benchmarking against surrounding councils reveals that they face the same constraints under the road rules and do not implement any additional measures beyond those adopted by council. Like us, they rely heavily on signage, designated traffic areas, and complaint-based enforcement to manage long-term parking of caravans and trailers. Let's go through the 3 main types. We have equipment trailers and caravans which are less than 7.5 metres long and registered. The road rules currently permit registered vehicles to park on street for an unlimited period. We have restricted trailers and caravans, which are longer than 7.5 metres long and registered. This is a vehicle or combination together with any load or projection that is 7.5 metres long or longer. These vehicles cannot park for more than 1 hour in a built-up area unless otherwise signed, in accordance with Section 200 of the road rules. And then we have unregistered vehicles, vehicles which have no registration at all and of any size. Under the TORUM, these must be identified as an abandoned vehicle, which on reasonable grounds may be removed by council. We have identified and assessed 7 different options to improve the management of long-term parking of these vehicles for council's consideration. Option 1 is to amend the local law. This option was reviewed and investigated back in 2021 and again for this report. As the TORUM has not been amended, the same legislative constraints remain. Council cannot include a provision to regulate caravans, boats and trailers in Local Law No. 2 unless official traffic signs are installed and advice of the restriction to be legally enforceable. Therefore, this option is not viable. Option 2 considered designing a new regulatory parking sign to target trailers and caravans. This would require a new sign design which would need to be approved by the Queensland Government, requires local law amendments. The problem is the sign must be designed to be clear and precise. It may be difficult to clearly define and visually distinguish these vehicles. And vehicles may simply relocate to other streets. This option is therefore not recommended. Option 3 looked at introducing a single traffic area across the entire city, which sounds comprehensive, it's not practical. It conflicts with TORUM's intent. A traffic area cannot overlap an existing traffic area, which are tailored to the parking needs of the area. Subordinate Local Law No. 2 would require amendments. Endorsement from DTMR would be required for state-controlled roads. It requires significant resources, signage installation, and maintenance in accordance with the MUTCD. It could be seen as visual clutter, And again, it could negatively impact areas without parking issues. So again, not practical and therefore not recommended. Option 4 was to expand existing traffic areas. These would require amendments to subordinate local law number 2, removing and relocating traffic area signs at entry and exit points to the traffic area, installing additional reminder signage within the expanded area in accordance with the MUTCD requirements. And again, vehicles may simply relocate to nearby streets, triggering more signage and enforcement needs. It's not likely to solve the problem. Not recommended. Option 5 is to assess case by case. This is the approach currently undertaken and is based on concerns and complaints. A site inspection would be conducted by an officer. If concerns are identified, traffic and infrastructure could install signs and lines in accordance with the MUTCD using existing and approved signs. Again, there's the risk of vehicles relocating, therefore it does require ongoing monitoring. This is a practical, targeted and flexible option, which is in line with our current legislation. This option is therefore recommended to be continued. Option 6 explored proactive community education. This could promote responsible parking and clarify rules, but also risk confusion in the community. Residents may expect enforcement where it's not legally supported. And awareness of legal parking rights could increase the issue. So this option is not recommended. Finally, option 7 is to continue advocacy to the Queensland government. Only amendments to the road rules would give the city and other local governments long-term, practical and flexible options to regulate specific vehicle types. This aligns with motions already submitted to the LGAQ and reflects our commitment to long-term policy improvements. In summary, while many options were considered, many are constrained, either by legal limitations, operational impracticalities, or a lack of flexibility in the current framework. Only targeted signage and continued advocacy offer realistic pathways forward. The recommendations are shown on the screen in your report. Thank you, Chair.
Questions for officers? I've got to Councillor Young.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks for the report. Does this all apply for vehicles that have got signage on them? So typically you might see a trailer or a van that's got a sign advertising some particular company or product.
Through the Chair, yes, Councillor, that is correct. It applies to the length of the vehicle, sorry.
Regardless of the sign? Regardless
if they're having advertisement on them, yes.
Councillor Doran, then we'll go to Councillor Fowler.
Thank you. I'm interested in option 5. I've just got a question relating to that. If it's not a regulated street, what signage could you put up what signage are you envisaging putting up, given that local law wouldn't be in place to change the regulation of that street? It says in here quarter hour and half hour parking or no stopping signs, but if it's not a regulated street, I think there's no local law that dictates that. Have I got that wrong?
Through the Chair, these could be the streets which are outside of traffic areas, could be inspected by an officer, and if infrastructure and transport and infrastructure would deem it necessary, we could do time parking in the street, no stopping signs. It really depends on the needs of the street, and if there is a safety concern or if there is any issues identified, it would be based on that.
So you don't need a local law to make that change. I assume that based on that answer. But so if you don't need a local law, can officers just make a no stopping sign decision or a 15-minute decision based on the street being used by caravans more than 7.5 metres? That's a legitimate reason to then change the parking rules in that street. I'm just trying to understand how enforceable option 5 is and how practical it is from an operational standpoint.
Through the Chair, thank you. That's a good question. As that same option says, if you do signage in specific streets, there's always a possibility that we could just may simply relocate to a nearby street. So yes, we could implement signage in specific streets where we have identified there's a problem of vehicles long-term parking, but it would not stop vehicles then just simply relocating to the nearby street.
Yeah, so they can relocate, Chair. I guess my question, and relocation isn't a big problem, right? Because you're inconveniencing them, which this actually potentially might make them look for long-term storage solutions. So I'm not against just inconveniencing them if that's the goal. My question is, do we have the ability to just change a street, to change the street's parking conditions on the basis of long-term parking being there? So we can just impose 15-minute parking, can we?
Through the chair, yes, we could, but you'd have to understand that would impact all road users. So if you put 15 minutes in a street, that's going to affect the residents and all of the cars. And we'd primarily do that usually on a safety basis rather than an amenity concern.
Thanks, Renee. I guess that seems to me to be quite a blunt instrument rather than a scalpel to try and get to the core problem. So thank you. I suppose the other question that I have is, did the officers explore a potential new local law? I understand it's not going to fix the immediate problem, but potentially looking at an amenity-related law for appearance or visible damage or covered in debris or no movement for extended periods. Whilst the car may be registered, for example, it's creating an amenity impact, and you could look at potentially a local law in the future around bringing something in that might address those amenity issues that could get around the fact that it might be registered but still clearly abandoned.
Through the chair, in terms of the amenity-specific aspect, I think whilst there's been an initial look, probably not in depth, to see if that is specifically possible, so that could be a further investigation. What we have focused on is whether there could be a local law that could be created to make changes across the entire LGA, and at this stage, unfortunately, that's not the case.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm happy for officers to take that on notice. I just in relation to that, Luke, could be that new provision might allow you to create a law outside of the state's requirements under the TORM, which could then be a local law. But I appreciate letting me have a comment. That's it. Thanks.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I just wanted to ask how we're currently capturing the data of the complaints of long-term storage of the trailers, boats and caravans. Many divisional officers, this is a hot topic. This is our number one issue in Division 2. However, we don't lodge those as CRs. So we deal with residents one-on-one when these issues do come through. So when we're talking about the data that you've reported and that 4% figure from January to August, perhaps that may underestimate the problem across the city?
Through the chair, yes, if we haven't actually received anything, we've taken from the data that we've received. So we used CRs and also the parking complaints that we received. If there are additional ones that have been received in the councillors' offices that we've not received, they're not included in those figures.
Is it that city officers then would like us to raise CRs for every complaint that we get so you have more accurate data? I know that's a lot of paperwork, but I'm just trying to ascertain how you can have accurate data on this matter.
Through the chair, Councillor, I think if we could look at probably a more practical way of capturing that and perhaps take that on notice to look at the best way. We definitely want to capture the data and certainly acknowledge that what's reported in the actual item might be slightly less than what is happening real time. So we look at a way to do that in a bit of an easier fashion. If we can get away from that over administrative burden, we certainly will.
Thank you. And Chair, through you, I just also wanted to ask a question just around potential targeted trials. Can officers confirm whether there are any legislative or operational constraints that would prevent us from identifying roughly 10 citywide hotspots in consultation with divisional councillors, of course, and trialling some approved regulatory signage?
Through the chair, one of the challenges we would face there is the actual regulatory sign that we would need to install. In order to make the sign, we need to request Transport and Main Roads. It then needs to go to a working group for review and approval. So that actual time period, we're looking at 12 months or longer for that to actually happen. So one of the big catches we do have there is an actual appropriate sign that would be able to be used during the trial.
So could we maybe address the first part of Councillor Fowler's question there? So regulatory sign apart, the legislative operational constraints of actually doing a targeted trial. Could we get an answer to that part?
Through the chair, for the operational trial, if we set a period up and we knew what we were looking at, definitely we can look at operationally how we could enforce that. The key driver, though, is that the officers need the sign in order to do any action.
I just have one last one, if that's okay, Chair. Just regarding option 7, are we specifically seeking a definition of long-term parking and what that means, or a scope to revisit the vehicle classifications and length thresholds in the Torum?
Through the chair, our recommendation would be that we would be able to define different types of vehicles, because a motor vehicle or a trailer is registered in a different way with Transport Main Roads. If there is an ability within the Torum for them to define that, then we can make specific regulations on that.
Okay, thank you.
We'll go Councillor Gates and Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I just wondered if we adopt this recommendation as part of option 7, would there be the possibility of exploring gaining permission to impound a vehicle where it's clearly been parked indefinitely and it impedes council's ability to maintain its assets? I've got several examples where the road has cracked and weeds are growing through the cracks in the road because a vehicle has not been moved for such a long time, but there's no ability to move them on, nor for access to the problem because the vehicle's parked there.
Through the Chair, Councillor, that's actually a piece of work that we're currently undertaking, probably separate to this particular issue, to look at that exact aspect and then to look at what legislative drivers we would need in order to progress that. And I think importantly, separating that out from legitimately abandoned vehicles where they're unregistered, we don't have details of the owner. So recognise that as an issue, and that's currently being progressed.
Okay, thank you.
Is that a follow-up to that specific? I'll allow the follow-up.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing that. I just thought I'd mention to councillors I do have a change recommendation, and one of the changes that I do have that does address to some level Councillor Gates' concern.
Cool. So we'll go to Councillor Martin, and then we'll be edging closer towards a change rec after a couple more questions. Councillor Martin.
Chair. I was looking at our rules, what we can inhibit them by in terms of length or time, but do we not have an avenue around sort of just community safety? Like, it might be technically, legally, but if we did a traffic assessment for road dimensions, we would say sight lines need to be X. Is there no avenue to say this might be obstructing and provide a safety issue?
Through the Chair, Councillor, yes, we do have avenues for that. Again, we need to demonstrate that it is obstructing those sight lines or providing significant issues to oncoming traffic. We've dealt with a number of issues this year that relate directly to that. But unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily cover the full extent of the complaints that we're talking about here.
Great. And final question, Chair. So in terms of our signage options, we can either limit times for all vehicles, not specifically trailers, boats and caravans, or we implement a local area that says they can't park here. Do we have any other signs that would specifically target the scalpel?
Thank you.
Is there any other signage opportunities?
Through the Chair, unfortunately it's really just time restrictions, or we can ban parking completely if there was a safety issue.
I saw Councillor Patterson's hand before, and I'll come to you, Councillor O'Neill.
Just to say that I've also got some minor change recommendations, so I can add that on to Councillor Fowler's.
Councillor O'Neill, then Councillor Doran.
Thanks, Chair. Just probably to Renee. I have had some correspondence from a resident who's just wants to clarify that we're only talking about trailers that length and longer, because he's just wondering about the smaller box trailers that we often see on the streets as well. And because we've only sort of mentioned trailers in the media, well, the media's only mentioned trailers, he was concerned about whether the smaller box trailers would be affected, and also any vehicles with a bit of height, say horse floats or something like that. We're not including those in this particular issue.
Through the chair, so the approach is for all trailers. So at the moment we have no ability to define what that is. If we make a rule at the present moment, it is for all vehicle types under the TORM. What we are asking the state for is the ability to be able to segment that out.
Thank you. I wanted to query option 6. I note that it's not recommended, but I feel as if I'd like to understand what about a particular element within the table on page 561 was considered not something to proceed with, and it's encouraged use of off-street or private storage options in relation to proactive community education, which is option 6. Feels like the city actively encouraging people to, say, park in their garages or park on their property or find commercial storage solutions for their caravans and for their boats is actually a pretty good thing for the city to be encouraging. And I'd like to understand why that was discounted as part of the recommendation. Thanks.
Through the chair, Councillor, I think that was discounted purely from a standalone option, so we didn't think it would be necessarily effective in isolation. So certainly take on your point in terms of it having the ability to be connected with other elements of the recommendations.
Chair, I think if I don't want to put words in your mouth, Luke, but you're open to it. It's just as part of the package of option 6. Option 6 was not recommended. If that's the case, I'd query whether or not, in due course, whether or not the committee might seek to add that to a recommendation, and the city's communications teams could explore communications methods to help encourage people to use their private property for.
So we'll take our last question from Councillor Gates, and we'll look to start to panel beat a motion together from the sounds of it. Councillor Gates.
It'll be a very quick question. I just wondered when the weight provision was removed. Remember, it used to be 4.5 tonnes as well, and it's not mentioned anywhere in the report. So was that removed last time round?
Through the chair, that still stands. That is still under the TORM. It is 7.5 metres length or 4.5 GVM. Our officers just cannot enforce after weight. That's why we did not include it in here, because we are not basing our inspections on the weight of the vehicle. We do purely on lengths. We do not have any abilities.
But it still is in the TORM.
It is in the TORM, yes.
Thank you. And if I could just make a comment about box trailers, I think Luke will remember a few years ago there was a little boy knocked over at Highland Reserve. And so box trailers are really dangerous, and whilst the safety concern or lack of safety was recognised, there was nothing we could do about it, and he spent a long time in hospital. So that really needs to form part of our evaluation as well, the site available from box trailers for little kids.
Okay, Councillor Fowler indicated she had a change recommendation, and then I've heard bits and pieces from others, or maybe some other amendments to it. So we'll get Councillor Fowler's proposed change up first, let her explain what is in hers, and we'll look and see if we can melt everything else in together.
So primarily it's the addition of 3, which made, so 4 and 5 were the existing 3 and 4. So 3's been slotted in because it fitted in that order. So number 3 says that in consultation with divisional councillors, city officers identified 10 hotspot areas across the city to explore a trial of regulatory signage. Explore a trial is really in there to give some flexibility into what Ms. Roots was commenting on with the 12 months time frame that it will take and the consultation required with DTMR to create any regulatory signage. The number 6 that's been added is that city officers explore the potential for a new local law to cover vehicles, including caravans, boats and trailers, that create an abandoned appearance working within the legal framework under the Local Government Act to explore options enforceable under amenity provisions, even if technically registered, such as flat tyres, visible damage, covered in debris and or no movement for extended periods, which nods to Councillor Gates's point before, and perhaps I would like to check that Councillor Gates was happy with that number 6 as well.
Okay, so what I'm going to propose to do, while everyone has a chance to read that and let it sink in, I'm going to try and flesh out the few other amendments or suggestions that we're throwing around to see what Councillor Fowler's live motion, as I'll take it at the moment, to see if she's open to those being added, to see if we get there in one hit or if we're up for an amended debate. So, Councillor Curtis, I'm aware of a provision you had first.
Thanks, Chair. And before I present it, I just was seeking some clarity on item 3. The regulatory signage is what? Is this an introduction of new timed parking, or is this specific to trailers?
Specific to trailers.
Right. So what have you got for us, Councillor Curtis, as a possible addition?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I absolutely agree this is a step in the right direction. It's the number 1 complaint that comes through Division 4 as well. So really keen to see us progressing something, but I think it needs to be tied in with some additional attention on the consequential planning that needs to be considered. A very strong attractant to the Gold Coast is the access to our waterways. And as we reduce lot sizes in areas like mine, it's going to be less and less possible for people to store these on their property. And so I think we're placing a lot of assumption that the industry has capacity to take on boat storage. And I don't necessarily have that information. I saw a pre-briefing and I don't think we have that detail available yet. However, Gold Coast Waterways Authority are doing a boating, mooring, storage and access strategy at the moment, and they're doing a demand study into boat storage. And my amendments are seeking that we consult with them throughout that process so that we have a better understanding of what access people actually have to private storage and where those locations are, because my very rudimentary investigation into it is that there's lots in the north, like Steiglitz and places like that. I don't think it's reasonable for a Division 4 resident to be expected to drive past the outlet to go pick up a boat to go out for the morning. So I'd just like to make sure that if we're going to introduce or look to introduce this into the future, we've really stepped forward what the consequences are and started to plan for it. And it might mean starting to talk to industry about increasing boat storage capacity, you know, if that is going to present as an issue. So I think the amendments, are they up there as 7 and 8?
So, Councillor Fowler, I know you and Councillor Curtis had a conversation. Are you happy to accept 7 and 8 to your proposed change recommendation?
Yes, I am, Chair. I think that more information is good when we're doing decision making. So I think Councillor Curtis's 7 will give us additional information that we don't currently have about the current and forecasted boat storage, and that number 8 is a report coming back with those considerations regarding storage. So I think that more information the better. So I have no issues with 7 or 8.
The collection of that information and timing of it with a new planning scheme actually works because it's a consideration in amongst that broad piece of work too. So I would agree with both your thoughts. Councillor Patterson, you flagged something else next. What did you have in mind?
Most of it is already covered. I would just like to make there is one small change I want to make, but before I do that, I just want to make a comment on the Gold Coast Waterways Authority matter. Southport Yacht Club submitted a planning application, and through that process, and it was something that we looked at and it was something that Gold Coast Waterways Authority looked at, they identified that if they had just had another slither of land, a quite small amount, but a slither of the state land next, it significantly increased their ability to increase storage capacity. So I think in terms of our advocacy, it might be worthwhile highlighting that, because it does require the state government to make a commitment on a very small part of land where Gold Coast Waterways Authority currently sits. If that piece went to them, it's one of those kind of jigsaw puzzle things where if you add this 10%, you can increase 50% storage. So my comment change recommendation was just that It's not 3 anymore. So under, what was the one where we were amending endorse options? Okay, so 4, if we made that 4A and then we made a 4B, that the Mayor write to the Premier advocating for the amendments and to consider state land support for increasing boat storage at Southport Yacht Club.
Councillor Fowler, while we wait for the exact words to come up, do you have a issue with that proposed addition, or do you wish to muck around with the words at all?
I'm not across the issue, to be honest, with the Southport Yacht Club specifically, but understand that as the local councillor, perhaps Councillor Patterson is, be keen to hear from other councillors on if they had any thoughts as well. But to be honest, I'm happy to leave it in there. I don't see there's any harm in having it there. I'm just not across the issue.
Okay, let's just let those words get up there first. Councillor Doran? Yeah, please.
Didn't the LGAQ just resolve to do the writing to the advocacy on behalf of the city? I think we had a delegate there. I'm not sure. Did we endorse that? So we're a party to that anyway. So would that be a double up, the Mayor writing to it?
It was definitely supported at the LGAQ conference. I think you'll find all those other mayors are writing as well on it.
Sorry, may I?
Councillor Patterson, so we've got your addition up.
Yeah, so just for clarity on this, and it's not, this isn't confidential to the Gold Coast Waterways Board because this information was made public. But the reason why I know about it is because we did go into it in depth when I was the city's representative on Gold Coast Waterways, as Councillor Curtis now is. So it's really just for us to say to the state, hey, boat storage is an issue. We recognise that this can be done, and if they were to sell that land, then it's gone. That capacity to increase by so much will make a big difference. So I just think it's worth making a note of it now.
Right. So, Councillor Fowler, it is your motion. So, if you're appreciating it's a little bit outside of what your original intent was, but it's specific enough that it's known what it is. I'm definitely aware of what Councillor Patterson's referring to, and I know the Mayor is as well. So I don't think he would have a problem with sending a letter about that specific issue. We can check with that before the full council meeting if there's a problem with that.
Thank you, Chair. My only concern is it kind of takes it away from the issue at hand, and perhaps it's stage 2. But I'm happy to leave it in there. I am, but I do think it's probably not as relevant as the rest of the resolution.
Yeah. Okay, I had Councillor Doran first, and I've got Councillor Curtis.
Can I add to the Christmas tree that city officers explore a proactive communication education campaign that encourages use of off-street or private storage options. And that's all for that. And just a quick comment on, I think that we're talking a lot about boats here. I've got apartments in my area where they might have one car park for a 3-bedroom apartment, and people have to make choices as to whether or not they get a second or third car. People are making a choice to get a boat that they can't store on their property. And so we have to be mindful that that car park is for everyone, not for someone to store their private boat. But I'm happy with the resolution.
Councillor Fowler, we're up to number 10. Are you happy to accept Councillor Doran's proposed?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Right,
I'm Santa Claus today.
Councillor Curtis is coming back for a second bite.
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to seek some input from the officers because in my briefing when we discussed proactive communication engagement campaigns, they have a double-edged sword in the fact that a lot of people don't actually know that you can park these indefinitely on the street, and it may have the effect that people that didn't know before, if we go out loud and strong, now think, why on earth am I either parking it on my property when I can park it in the street? And so I was just going to see how much of a risk you see that as being.
Through the chair, we would need to be very careful about the communication that we do because it does have a double-edged sword. We would have to work very closely with marketing and communications to ensure that we're hitting the right tone.
Follow up, Councillor Curtis.
And just with the addition from Councillor Patterson, I'm not across it specifically, and I probably will just do some research between now and full council. I'd just be nervous about basically prioritising one part of my community over another. I have other storage facilities within Division 4, and I wouldn't want to see advantages thrown to one element to try to fix it. I'd probably be expecting the report to come first, but if there's a time sensitivity with that, I just need to get across what it might mean and whether it is unfairly
so there is
advantaging someone else.
There is a time sensitivity at the spit. There are definitely being decisions being made about what blocks of land go out to tender next and whatnot. I am relatively comfortable with what Councillor Patterson's proposed because I know the Mayor is aware of it and I believe he's happy to advocate on behalf of the yacht club and the industry there, but we will follow it up between now and full council to make sure that there's no concerns, that we're not creating a problem. But a one-off letter specific to that issue I don't think is a problem. Councillor Young.
Just a question with regard to number 3. Councillor Fowler suggested 10 hotspot areas. I wonder if we take out a number and just identify a range of hotspot areas or a sample or something like that, because I'd certainly like to nominate one. There's 14 divisions. Perhaps we're all in the same boat. And that,
are you suggesting everybody gets a prize?
Well, you wouldn't want to miss out on
Never.
that, would you? So
it is Councillor Fowler's motion. After hearing what Councillor Young's concern is, Councillor Fowler, do you want to leave it at 10? Do you want to propose some wording that gives flexibility to officers to maybe suggest more or less depending on what they find?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to give it more flexibility, but I just think a gauge is good so that city officers, we don't come back and there's 100 hotspots across the city. So
a limited number.
Unlimited hotspots.
So, Mr. Connery, you are quite good with these words normally, so you understand the intent and you understand that for a trial to be really useful, there has to be a minimum amount to make it worthwhile. Do you have a suggested wording that gives you the flexibility to make sure that if we do proceed down this path that it meets our intent?
Chair, I think we do understand the intent and, I think we'd be able to conduct some pretty careful analysis across the city and identify an appropriate number of hotspot areas. The other key aspect that we're looking at is trying to just limit the number that we can effectively address with signage. We don't want to have that practicality issue. So perhaps if I could suggest the replacement of 10 hotspot areas, perhaps with just identify appropriate hotspot areas across the city to explore a trial of regulatory signage. If committee was satisfied with that from an officer point of view, we can definitely make that work.
Councillor Fowler, so it's your motion in the end. Do you want to accept Mr. Connery's proposal, acknowledging he very much understands your intent, or do you want to stick with a number?
I'm happy with appropriate hotspot areas. I think the intent's clear.
Everybody's hands shooting up. I'm going to come back and just check that we're done with Councillor Young first, and I'll come back across. Councillor Young next.
Just being pedantic, number 7, city officers explore the potential for a new local law to cover vehicles. I suggest that maybe to address vehicles, including caravans that create an abandoned. I'd suggest that present an abandoned appearance.
Again, Councillor Fowler, thoughts?
Thanks, Chair.
That's accepted. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we're coming back around this way. So actually you did have Councillor Gates first, and I'll come back to Councillor Curtis.
Thanks very much, Chair. Through you, can you just explain to me what we're able to put in place as regulatory signage when the local law exists as it is? I don't understand what the signage can say.
Through the Chair, I think in this particular instance we're actually talking about the creation of a new regulatory sign, which would then have to be progressed through that Transport and Main Roads process in order to effectively address those hotspot areas.
So it's the signage that's being investigated, not the hotspot areas?
through the chair, I believe both aspects can be covered.
Thanks.
Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. With the amendment to become appropriate hotspots, and I just want to get some clarity from the City Inspectorate about that. I'm a bit nervous about this one because I feel like if it becomes an availability, I'm going to have Esplanade streets that say we want it, and then I create a problem the street back from it. So this wouldn't be for those. You would take those sort of outcomes into account, and it would be more for like solutions on Hope Island Road, as an example.
Through the chair, Councillor, we would need to take into consideration all those elements. So our intent would be to conduct a holistic review of those locations and understand interdependencies without like inadvertently moving the issue to another street. There is always, though, probably an element of risk that we'll just need to consider in depth.
Okay, we have well and truly panel debated this one around. No, there isn't much left. I feel like we've rehatched a lot of stuff in this that we've heard before. Councillor Fowler, can I confirm with you for the public record that you're happy to accept all 37 of those amendments to your motion, and that you're happy to still move that as it currently stands?
I am happy to move the motion that the committee built as it currently stands.
Okay, a seconder for the motion. Councillor Patterson seconds the motion. Councillor Fowler, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So this report actually came from a general business item I raised in planning, and it was asking for clear, practical options to address the long-term storage of trailers, boats and caravans in our streets, where safety, amenity and access were being compromised. While this was reviewed 6 years ago, I believed it was timely to reconsider, particularly given the scale of complaints across the city and the policy posture of the current state government. Residents are telling us the same story. Vehicles left for weeks or months, blocking sightlines, narrowing access and effectively converting public curb space into private storage. Curbside parking is a public asset, and under current Queensland settings, anything under 7.5 metres and 4.5 tonnes can sit legally on street indefinitely unless specific signage or traffic area rules exist. That leaves councils managing a citywide amenity and safety issue with very blunt tools. So what I'm proposing we recommend today is put this change recommendation forward, which is a balanced two-track approach. So continue compliance on complaint while being mindful that any yellow lines or time constrictions must not unintentionally squeeze out everyday car parking. That's why implementation has to be targeted and evidence-led. A new addition to trial targeted controls. So in consultation with divisional councillors, we're asking city officers to identify an appropriate number of hotspots where complaints and impacts are most acute and explore a trial of regulatory signage, which I've been made aware of, takes at least 12 months to create. This will give us a controlled, measurable way to test what actually works before scaling up. Amenity and safety considerations and volume of public complaints, I feel, should be explicitly inform those hotspot selections. And then advocating to the state. We need the state to help define long-term and consider refining classifications or thresholds so councils can set vehicle-specific parking limits where appropriate. We'll also keep backing the LGAQ motion with the Sunshine Coast Council to progress this. And lastly, we're asking officers to explore a new local law pathway within the Local Government Act framework for vehicles that present an abandoned appearance. So think flat tyres, visible damage, debris build-up or no movement over extended periods. Even if technically registered, persistent neglect undermines amenity and public confidence. This would give us an enforceable tool where safety and visual amenity are clearly impacted. So to finish off, this change recommendation is practical. It pilots local solutions where the pain is the greatest, protects day-to-day parking needs, and builds an evidence base. It also elevates the systematic fix, seeking clearer state definitions and enabling settings so councils aren't forced to apply blanket rules citywide, and it addresses a real community expectation that vehicles left looking abandoned shouldn't be allowed to park in neighbourhoods indefinitely.
Councillor Fowler, thank you. Is there a speaker against the motion? Is there anyone dying to contribute on this one? that case, if I could just very briefly add to Councillor Fowler's, there is. Yeah, please,
very
Councillor
quickly.
Patterson, you go.
Thank you. I just want to make it clear that, well, I'm personally aware that being driven by lifestyle is an important part to our city, and there is a balance to get right here. It is a frustrating thing, but we also recognise that people love a city where they can live in, they can travel from in their caravans, they can get boats onto water without having to be multi-millionaires, and that is an element and a balance that we need to be cognizant of. But I certainly support this because the frustration that's occurring on our roads is real. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I wanted to acknowledge first that this was Councillor Fowler's GBI, and while interestingly, this is definitely not the first time, even in my 5 years in this place, that this particular item's come through. Some of their proposals and thought into how we might tackle this inside the existing framework is new and is different. So acknowledging Councillor Fowler for that, but also acknowledging Luke and his team for bringing a slightly different mindset to possibly what we've had from officers before in this space. The only other thing I wanted to contribute is that while I'm all for looking at what we can do in the existing framework and trying to bend the framework where we can a little bit, that we really still remain very hands tied by what the state legislation says, and that the ultimate thing in this space would be for the state to amend their legislation to really allow this local government, but all local governments that wish to do more in this space, the flexibility to do so. So we're just going to end the call by saying that I think we've got 10 LNP members on the Gold Coast. It would be wonderful if all our state MPs could get on board with helping to advocate to the Minister in this space to help bring change to this in a partnership model, because what affects our streets affects state MPs as well. And if they could get on board and helping with this to get the legislation changed, that we can make the local law changes and we can tackle the problem together, very much with Councillor Patterson's point of a balanced approach in mind of we're not looking just to get rid of everybody out of it. It's really open to that community consultation on, is it an absolute ban on streets? Could it be you could only be there for 2 weeks at a time? There are lots of different options here, but what we must acknowledge, and it's been teased out today, is that this is definitely causing a lot of community complaints. Those complaints are normally around safety concerns, around the visibility when caravans or big trailers are left in streets for long periods. It's concerns around pedestrians, especially kids, coming out from behind these vehicles and getting clipped. So they are very real concerns. We will continue to take a balanced approach to listening to both non and existing owners. But again, that call to the state that legislation change would make a big difference here, and we hope our Gold Coast MPs can assist us with that. Councillor Fowler, do you wish to close? In that case, debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The change recommendation is carried unanimous. Councillors, that's item 6.5 dealt with. We will move on to 6.6. We're in fine form to bash recommendations around Trina, so watch out. Trina, do we have a presentation on this item? So I'll check with councillors. It's 11:30. Do we want the presentation, or are we seeking to go straight to questions? I'll be led by the floor. Yep. No? Councillor Martin, are you seeking the presentation?
I am, Chair, because I think with this one there was some additional recommendations.
That's fine.
Through the Chair, good morning, councillors. Today's item, Agenda 6.6 item, has a range of topics to cover. I'll just jump to the... Is that not working? Apologies. Up Apologies. Today we have an update on the monthly planning scheme update to give an update on what's been happening in the planning scheme program. A quick update on the status of the Section 18 notice, and an associated run through of all the work that's been done through our external advisory groups, and a policy update. The planning scheme update in terms of engagement through our advisory groups in the last month through the State Interest Reference Group. We've had a number of meetings with planning scheme matters, progressing the strategic environmental policy, local area planning considerations for the SPIT, and we've also met with the state to talk about the feasibility analysis having regard to the local growth management strategy. With respect to the Section 18 notice, we have been involved in ongoing discussions with the state to advance formal recognition of the plan-making steps under Section 18 of the Act. We don't have a resolution for today's agenda, but we will be coming back on the 18th of November to provide a presentation to seek resolutions of Council to progress the scheme under that section of the Act and take the necessary actions in that process. For our engagement through the advisory groups, as you know, we have a range of advisory groups that we've been engaging through our planning scheme policy as well as the state. And through those groups, we've also had a number of updates, including the strategic environment, LGMS, and also for some of the groups, we've had some updates or presentations on the feasibility analysis. The policy update, as most councillors will be aware, we have a number of policy areas that are contributing to the preparation of the planning scheme. We're doing a by-exception reporting on those matters. Probably the only thing to note this month is that for the transport policy work, we've identified it as being on track. We've gone through the tailored process with the team, and we've identified that due to the reprioritisation of work, that they're actually on track for progressing towards the scheme to improve our readiness for delivering the planning scheme. A reference to one of the policy attachments that we have attached to our agenda report today. We have attachments 2 and 3. As identified in the body of the report, these policy positions are a by-exception reporting, where we're bringing up matters that are high priority or foundational matters for the scheme that we want to get resolutions on to advance. With respect to the local area enabled planning, as most councillors will know, in 2016, with the commencement of the city plan, we shifted away from a number of LAPs. The 2003 Living Planning Scheme had a significant number of local area plans. The decision was made in the change and the transition to the city plan to reduce or remove local area plans, to reduce red tape and to streamline the process for obtaining development approvals. However, it's evident through our engagement to date with our advisory groups, there still remains a strong interest in enabled planning, and this was especially noticed through our community consultation on the LGMS Directions for Growth. Officers have undertaken a comprehensive review of benchmarking across Queensland, nationally and overseas, and we're recommending that we bring back local area enabled planning within the city, but we recognise that it should be limited where it's strategically justified, and it's in areas where we have specific provisions that are necessary to be articulated at a local level. Through the process to ensure efficiency, we've worked up 6 criteria based on the engagement, research and learning, so we can actually set some guardrails to how we can consider looking at which areas may be suitable and undertaking the related analysis. Those criteria are areas of city character, unique city character, areas where we expect city renewal to occur, areas where we have existing or planned category infrastructure investment, areas which have a specialised role or function, areas that are subject to specialised governance arrangements or master plans, and importantly also we have where we can actually ensure that we have the workability and efficiency of the scheme with any changes that may occur. As part of preparing the criteria or the enabled planning framework, we've identified a process where to determine if a place can be considered for consideration, it should meet at least 3 of those criteria, and also having regard to making sure that we don't alter the workability of the efficiency of the planning scheme with any changes. So we do want to put some guardrails around how we actually start to look at areas suitable for local area plans. In the context of the planning scheme program, we've taken a significant number of engagement events looking about the possibility of introducing local area plans through the reference groups and also with elected officials. I guess the main point of message that we've been provided throughout the process is that there's a genuine desire for the community to be had their voices heard, and making sure that we're actually hearing to the communities is more important than the actual tool or the implementation of changes that it brings. So the main message is that consultation is really important and it's really sought by the community. Through the process, the recommendations for increase, we'd like to advance the enabled planning framework to be applied for review of suitable areas for local area planning. And we'd also, as a consequence, we'd like to endorse local area plans to be included in the planning scheme as a mechanism. We do have a part in the scheme, but as you know, that the scheme doesn't contain local area plans. So what we're looking to do is envisage the use of that mechanism subject to appropriate review for locations. In terms of the next steps for local area enabled planning, we intend to bring a report back to the Planning and Regulation Committee early next year with recommendations about how we might go towards prioritising areas for local area plans. Lastly, the second attachment, policy attachment sought to be discussed today relates to planning scheme architecture. As identified in the agenda package and attachment 3, we've undertaken a considerable analysis of the city plan and its dual assessment pathway for code assessment, and we've identified there's a number of shortcomings or deficiencies in our city plan codes currently. The main observation through this process is that the city plan was aligned with the former repealed Sustainable Planning Act 2009 and the decision-making rules that were associated with that legislation. What we've come to understand now is that the codes and the code compliance rules that are currently in the city plan are misaligned with how development assessment occurs under the Planning Act and specifically for the bounded assessment process. In the context of doing a planning scheme, we recognise that there is an opportunity to move forward with a code structure and a compliance rules that are fit for purpose. We are shifting away from being bound by former state legislation and code templates, the planning scheme templates. So we're looking at an option that is suitable for the council. As part of the work we did look at a range of code structure and compliance options for the city plan. However, you can see on the screen to the right that the recommended option is to progress with a single pathway assessment where it's the best alignment with our high-level drafting principles with relation to simplification, usability, legal integrity, the reduction of risk, consistency, compliance and future-proofing. On balance, we think that where the council has the opportunity to bring forward a structure that's functional and usable, and we're no longer bound by specific government regulation or process, we consider that the single pathway constituting acceptable outcomes and performance outcomes will provide a platform that aligns with the Act and gives a functional planning scheme. For the code structure, we're recommending that we endorse the single pathway option as recommended in the attachment. On the screen before you, we have the recommendations to note the planning scheme program update and also to note the recommendations as contained with attachments 2 and 3.
Councillor Curtis is up. Oh, sorry, Councillor Curtis. Councillor Gates is up first.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Through you, is it the intention to carry the density provisions through to the new planning scheme? Because the only reason for considering density, in my understanding, is the availability of servicing by our infrastructure. And so often we don't meet the densities that are set in the planning scheme. So can you explain to me why we would continue on considering density as a scheme issue?
Yep, through the Chair, today's presentation is more about the overarching structure and the operation of the codes, not about specific topic matters. We have done some considerable analysis of residential density as a means to look at its performance, but we don't have a recommendation today to talk specifically to the residential density.
Will that be coming forward? as part of the new scheme?
Through the Chair, we are considering whether we take density forward in the new scheme or not, and that will be a policy position that will come back and workshop with councillors.
Okay, sorry to ask the wrong question today.
It's all right. Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. On the local area plans, I was looking through the sort of the framework and the criteria, and it mentions, like, highlights areas that are unique character, but mainly they're around growth or change in uplift. And I just wonder, is there any, with the local area plans, are they going to be used in areas where perhaps there's character, more of a preservation tool than a catalyst tool, or are we only using them through this framework as a catalyst tool?
Through the Chair, with the framework, we do cover off on city character renewal areas where there's infrastructure intended. So there's a range of criteria, and I guess with the process that we're looking to undertake and the guardrails in place, we're saying that we want 3 of those criteria to be met to be able to advance the investigations as the starting point. So ideally, there would be locations that have a number of those features, such as iconic city character and where we're expecting catalytic growth to occur.
So there wouldn't be positioned anywhere without catalyst growth.
Through the Chair, it could be areas where the investment isn't necessarily the main driver. There may be the characteristics of the locality by way of the natural environment or whatever the characteristics are, they would be one of the key drivers. So I guess we're looking to get a balanced consideration of at least 3 of those provisions or
George,
criteria.
Were you looking to add to that?
Yeah, look, Gav's summed it up quite well, but we will be bringing a future report that will consider the areas and how they've been assessed. But as Gav said, it's not necessarily just about one provision, so it will be on balance around. It needs to meet 3 of those, and it also needs to meet the workability of the scheme. So that will be balanced, and then the recommendation will be brought to Council, and Council will be able to look at the prioritisation of the areas. But with the scheme as a whole, we won't be looking to necessarily have a handbrake scheme. We'll be looking to preserve characteristics and areas through environmental conservation and things like that, but we won't be looking to back zone or anything through this scheme.
Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. One of the other ones, I'm just seeking a bit of an understanding as to when we can get to sort of local consultation, because I'm constantly have community coming to me saying they want to sort of be able to input at a local plan level, height, scale, form. Would officers be able to, is there an ability for officers to assist councillors with holding something at divisional level? Are we at that stage yet, or when can we be at that stage that communities and divisional councillors can really get into the nitty-gritty?
No, whoever wants to take it about where in the work program we get to that part of it. Acknowledging we've already done a hell of a lot of that through LGMS for the last 18 months.
That's right. So through the Chair, we have a communications strategy that we'll be bringing forward shortly, which will include how we're going to consult with both your local divisional areas, but also just the community as a whole. Mindful that there's probably going to be a separate amount of consultation for those areas that we deem are probably going to have local plans. So that's all going to be information that's coming. But absolutely, we're always available if there is some work that you need done on that communications front. Please let us know.
Okay, thank you. And Chair, I have an amendment when you're ready, but
we'll keep ticking along with questions first. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I just had a question around the local area plans and how many do we feel we can confidently get completed by the time the new planning scheme is developed? And is that, if we had more time, would you be doing more? Or I just wanted some advice around that.
Yeah, look, the focus will be on transition plans in the first instance, and then, as I said, we'll be bringing a report back, which will be early in the new year, around whether or not we can facilitate any other areas. Now, in terms of timing question, if you have more time, we can always do more, but that's the same with the scheme as a whole, and there's pros and cons to doing it nice and tight and quickly, as well as extending out the time. So I think on balance, you've got to weigh up what the benefits and cons are to keeping it nice and tight as opposed to extending it out.
Acknowledging that we're only talking about the framework at this stage, like there is a scenario where there's no LAP that actually comes out of any of that. This is just endorsing the framework. If there is any LAPs or neighbourhood planning that come out of it, it's a future decision. Councillor Doran.
Thank you, Chair. I said I wanted to query two elements of the report. On page 577, it talks about employment lands, and I'm wondering if officers could talk a little bit around what the strategic intent behind employment lands are, noting that it says in the report identifying the need for an additional 173,000 jobs to accommodate the growth in population. And is there an element of splitting that between industrial and commercial office, noting that we're primarily a white-collar workforce here on the coast?
Yeah, sure. Through the Chair, the team have kicked off a body of work called the Employment Lands Investigation. So it's focusing on undertaking economic analysis and providing advice that will inform the development of policy or documents like the LGMS. So we have done a bunch of targeted work as part of this program. So far we're working through a document, say for instance, called the Gold Coast Economic Narrative. That was to inform the LGMS. We have then been able to identify where our gaps may be in terms of our employment lands across the coast. And broadly speaking, we've been able to look at industrial land, mixed use and centres. So there are technical notes that will be brought forward to a councillor workshop coming up at the end of the year to take you through recommendations based on that.
To follow up, Chair, so just for the thousands watching at home, as part of the work we're doing, you are giving pretty good and thorough consideration to ensuring that we have the employment lands, which, as I understand it, means the properties that can house jobs here on the coast to accommodate the growth in people. So that's a priority for the team.
Yes, that is correct. So far we've been able to ascertain that there has been an increase in population, for instance, on the Gold Coast, but employment over the years between 2001 and 2024, that employment's actually increased by over 100% on the coast. So it's certainly something we're looking at, making sure that we do have enough land to be able to support self-containment of employment on the Gold Coast as well.
Okay, thank you. I just had one last question. It was in relation to 5.3.2, the planning scheme architecture, and I'm wondering if a city officer could talk us through that in a very, for me, an idiot-proof way, a simplistic way. Talk us through the changes that you're proposing, because it says here that after the 10-year review, you've essentially said you're looking for a more user-friendly and effective planning scheme. So I'm wondering if you could talk us through what that might look like from a practical sense.
Through the Chair, there's a little bit of history. I'll try not to go too far into the detail, but obviously our process of undertaking development assessment occurs through the decision-making processes that are guided by the state planning legislation, and then we provide assessment benchmarks, which are just provisions in their codes, to allow for that assessment to be undertaken and a decision to be reached. When the city plan was put together, it was crafted under a former legislation, the Sustainable Planning Act, and we also were required to put in some rules for how you demonstrate if you meet all the criteria on a code, so that's the code compliance rules. We were given a set process for how code compliance was done under the city plan, and we had a criteria in the planning provisions or the state planning legislation that said once you get it on compliance, what do you do with it? What provisions can you use? Where there's a pathway under the current scheme, you have two pathways to use: acceptable outcomes, AOs, you probably see the reports, and performance outcomes if you don't comply with what are normally quantifiable provisions. And then if you are wanting to take a step further, you can actually use what actually are currently available is overall outcomes. So at the moment, there are processes where you can actually work your way through those 3 sets of criteria to define or determine if you're complying with the topic that's the subject of the benchmarks. The way in which the code compliance rules are currently structured, you can actually choose which pathway you use, either to use AOs or POs or go straight to the overall outcomes. The benchmarks that are set at those different levels, they don't have the same meaning or emphasis. So there may be a PO, for instance, that says something quite strong and clearly, where the overarching overall outcome that relates to that same topic is less specific and it doesn't say things in the same way, but the process under the rules is actually allowing applicants to choose which set of provisions they'd like to utilise. So I think that's the key emphasis, that we want to be able to express our provisions in a way that's clear and meaningful for all the users, rather than splitting out.
Okay, so just to see if I understand that correctly, so I understand the 3 pathways. The architecture of this next planning scheme is going to look to make that more simplified rather than have the 3 different more complex ways, so that the community would hopefully the outcome would be the community would be less confused over those provisions and why they're being used. And so is that to remove some of the subjective nature of the assessments, which are then sometimes can be the more controversial elements of it?
Through the chair, I guess it's important to note that we do operate in a planning environment, and the legislation is we're in a performance-based system. So we obviously want to continue to have acceptable outcomes that give a degree of measure or articulate what council's preferred option is for an outcome. And then we would like to put in performance outcomes that give a level of specific and detail, but we don't necessarily want to be putting things in a really hard, rigid form. So it really depends on the circumstances of the provisions or the codes as to how far we take the expression. But I guess the main benefit of having only one set of provisions is that we actually provide only one set of criteria or guidance rather than providing 2. So I guess the benefit is we'll have that one set that gives you the meaning or clarity as to, and however that's expressed. It could be in subjective terms or it could be prescriptive depending on the appropriateness of the circumstances.
I think, Councillor Doran, your question was good in that sense that wouldn't just provide better ease for the community to be able to follow it through, but it's also going to make it a lot easier for our assessment officers as well. That, you know, when you write a scheme at a point in time and then 3 years, 5 years, 10 years later, probably the people that wrote the scheme are no longer even the organisation, getting lost in what was the intent. You know, especially the overall outcomes that Gav mentioned are very flexible at the moment. And I constantly hear it from assessment officers, like, you know, it'd be lovely to talk to the person who wrote this of what the actual intent behind these words were. So I've definitely understood from the single pathway option that through Jordana makes this point every time, through very good drafting, that we'll hopefully get a pathway that is easier for the community to understand and be able to see how things step through. A lot easier for a developer lodging something to understand what the intent is as well, because that's important. And then for our assessment officers trying to assess against it, that'll be easy for them as well. And then the final part of it that I've raised before is that in terms of judges, then if something gets to appeal and then ending up in court and doing a review afresh, that it's easier for them as well, because I've read in a lot of judgments where they've said, you know, our read of this is this, and I don't necessarily think that's how it was ever written in the first place. But once it gets to a judge, that's their decision. That's the final part I'd mention on the architecture is that in making amendments to the scheme will be a lot easier as well, because one of the complex things at the moment is if you try and do an amendment, you've got to do an amendment to both pathways, and we have a lot of conflict at the moment where you amend one pathway, the overall outcome, trying to keep it super flexible, you end up with conflict everywhere, and it's why we've seen a lot more people going straight to the overall outcome, which the community don't get straight away. It'd make it a lot easier with one pathway to make hopefully more nimble amendments in the future. That can be done based on Jordana's excellent drafting and review. Any other questions for officers on this one? can take that. So I'm happy to move, and you can take that as my open and close. Second, Councillor Doran. Cool. So I've got nothing else to say in it. Councillor Martin, I believe, has an amendment to put forward.
I do, Chair.
Apologies, I forgot.
No city
plan. So Councillor Martin, I think you've given some words to the Chamber support.
I have, Chair.
Yeah.
And that's, if they can bring it up, which is addition of a 4. Probably can't talk to it till I get a second. Would you like me to?
Yeah, so I'm happy for it just to be included in my motion and defer to you to speak to it.
Thank you, Chair. Would you like me to read it, Chair?
We'll just let it get up to the proper motion first, and I just need to check that Councillor Doran's happy to support what Councillor Martin is seeking. I'm happy to accept it. It was going to happen anyway, but I understand why Councillor Martin wants to really bring a point to it today. Councillor Gates.
Thank you. Does this relate to the suggested 17-metre height on Jefferson Lane that were part of Amendments 2 and 3 that the state rejected?
So it would appear with that bottom sentence that it does.
Because we've already tried and failed, which is, I just have a concern. I know it was a different government, so maybe that's the reason, but if this related to our last amendment package that was rejected, I'm a little...
So I think Councillor Martin is well and truly aware of that. It is a different government and a different state MP as well, which may or may not make a difference. I can appreciate why Councillor Martin wants to add this on, because he's looking to have a conversation with his community, and we've heard that focused a few times a day, so acknowledge your concerns, Councillor Gates. I made the point, what Councillor Martin is seeking here would happen as part of the scheme anyway, but calling it out now, I can understand why that's important to him. So Councillor Doran, are you happy to second still? I'm happy for it to be there. I encourage all councillors to be having conversations with their community, and if Councillor Martin feels like this enables him to have a conversation with the community, I'm happy to support it. Councillor O'Neill?
Just a question, Chair. I think and I certainly have areas in my division that I would like to see some changes made in a new city plan, and I've talked to some of the residents in that area. But I'm just concerned that my residents may see this and go, well, why aren't you doing this, Councillor? I think it's part of a process. That probably goes to what Councillor Gates was saying, that we have to do a process. And I do understand the challenges that Councillor Martin have. I have the same challenges. I just don't want to be setting a precedent that we're preempting before we go through a statutory process that we're all going through. Just a little bit of concern, and if you think it's appropriate, that's fine. But I just, I will be probably questioned by some of my residents as to why I'm not targeting a particular area that I'd like to see changes. They know I'd like to see changes, and I have always put those forward to office as part of the process.
So I was happy for Councillor Martin to test it with the floor and then for it to go through. So I don't have an issue with it, but I acknowledge what you're saying. And if the committee feels like it's not the way for this to occur for those exact reasons, that's your call to move it foreshadowed, and we can vote this down if that's the way it goes. Councillor Patterson?
I am happy to support this like this, but Councillor Gates just mentioned perhaps it could be done as a GBI, so it's separated from this. That's a consideration.
So I hate that even more, because then I'm going to end up with 100 GBIs targeting different areas. So, Councillor Martin, I don't mean to steal this from you here, but I'm going to explain why I am happy to support it being out of this motion, because while I acknowledge that in all of our communities we have different sectors that would love to see very targeted areas, I think we need to be honest that Councillor Martin probably has the most difficult area to deal with in this space that are very, very interested in strong views in this space. It's important to him. If it's the committee's will not to have it added on there for the reasons mentioned, then that's the committee's will. If you have got a really particular area that in a future update you want to call out in this same way, because it's not leading to a piece of work jumping ahead of anyone else. It is simply putting on the public record that this divisional councillor intends to have this strong conversation with his community and with these officers as part of the new planning scheme. It doesn't do anything else apart from that. If you want to look at that in the future too, I'm open to that at that point, because I encourage all of you regularly to have those conversations. And if putting it in a recommendation like this enables you to open that door up and have that chat early as it is, because it'll come up through the statutory process, I'm not against that. If it means you're talking with the community, is my personal view. If you have a different view and want to vote this one down, I'd only ask that someone put up a foreshadowed back to the original recommendation so we've got something left on the floor. Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm going to support Councillor Martin, but my fear, I want to put it right out there, that my fear is we're setting him up to fail, because I was part of the council, as was Councillor O'Neill, that adopted the last planning scheme. And the fact is that there was no data supporting that reduction in proposed height. It was something the community of Jefferson Lane wanted it, but it was purely the former chair of planning's motion, and I think you'll agree, EGM, that it was his suggestion that it be 17 metres, and with no data to support it, and it was firmly rejected by the state. So I'll support it if Councillor Martin really believes in what's there, but I fear that it won't gain any feet and it may be setting you up for failure, because I'm not sure you understood the background to the original amendment. It was changed on the last day of our consideration from the floor, in my recollection.
So, Councillor Gates, I think that is a very fair warning to give to Councillor Martin, and I've reflected similar ones before, that there's always a double edge to this. Again, it's just Councillor Martin's request. He wants to go about it this way. I'm happy to back the divisional councillor to go have that chat, but I think he well and truly understands that this new planning scheme is evidence-based, and every suburb has potential for growth, and we'll be looking for that infrastructure capacity to lead most of us in those decisions. But having this very specific conversation, I'm not against. So, Councillor Martin, I think everyone apart from you has had a chance to speak on this particular one now. So you've heard everyone else's input. You're still smiling and still happy to have it up there, or do you want to happy to proceed?
Happy to.
So I'm going to defer to you to outline what you're hoping to achieve with this, and then we'll vote on the matter.
Thanks, Chair. And I take the comments. I did approach the Chair around a general business, but I think for these reasons to work it into the planning scheme. And what I would say is this doesn't say we're going to the state with that. It doesn't. This is part of the optionality that the city planning team work would do. I think the unique part about this one is that there was a resolution by council and it was rejected by the state. I think that's a failing of the former state, not of this council. This is purely just to make sure that those considerations are part of the options going forward, and it's not even as prescriptive as it must be 17 metres. This is just around that unique enclave of character that we had signalled to the community. This council had gone out to the community and said, we are going to be doing this. It's going up to the state. So I can't think of anywhere more within the city where the community expectations and the city plan is more divided, and that's evident through every DA that come here under the 2016 plan. So I just want to signal to my community that this area, whilst that previous amendment went up and was not successful with the former state government, we've got a new state government with different views, that I think that it should just still be back on our work, our planning work. It's not about getting away from growth. We've all got targets to meet, but we know the existing city plan says that we can accommodate the growth, but not in a way that the community expects. So this is about, how does the community want to see its growth? less reliance on the coastal corridor has been a consistent theme. So it's how does Division 13 and certainly Palm Beach accommodate its growth? So I just, I come to each DA and I feel like I'm fighting this with my hands tied behind my back. I was not part of the 2016 plan. I have no say in whether the 50% uplift was there. I have no say in when 7 stories in Jefferson Lane turn to 29 metres, which, overnight that's 9 to 10 stories. So what I can do is focus on the future. The community has said to me that this area that we previously said we'd look at lowering, that's on the table, and we look at accommodating the growth in the broader scheme. So I hope my colleagues support me because, I think without looking at this, I can't see how I could support a new planning scheme, given every single DA that currently comes to me in the medium density residential zone, east of the highway. I'm getting overwhelming community sentiment. So I'm just asking that it be, and the chair talked about this was already going to be looked at, but this signals to the community that is absolutely being called out and being looked at. It may not be 17 metres, but it is being squarely looked at. So that's why I'm seeking to move that amendment.
Right. So I'm going to close quickly just to focus back on what's in the report, because it's a fairly important update because it's the first time we've seen the full circle back of pieces of policy work that have now done the whole ring through all the advisory and reference groups, been through workshops with us, and now coming back with the start of endorsed policy positions, which is a really good sign. And I know for the team is a really important outcome. So just to call that out, we've only focused on 2 areas today, but the 2 important areas, that very strong sentiment that came through the LGMS, calling for local area plans, which when we dug a little bit deeper, which we really did at the community reference groups, they're wanting to see a little bit more understanding of how they can have a greater impact in their local areas. That starts through the consultation part of it, but explaining to them that sometimes it's actually just through stronger statutory provisions in terms of height overlays instead of necessarily creating a local area plan. So we'll need to be careful in managing that expectation that an LAP maybe isn't the best tool to preserve something. In fact, stronger statutory provisions that are available through zones and precincts could be instead, but that's to come in the future. We've discussed the architecture at strong length. I didn't ask the question of Mick in the end, but I was really pleased that the feedback I had from the assessment section was that there had been really good feedback and input from them into that architecture part of it. And you all know my focus as part of this new scheme that our assessment team must be a key stakeholder in all the policy work. So really pleased with that early feedback in this space. And I'll finish with, there's been a little bit of chat about the addition of number 4. I recognise the input from all councillors, but especially from Councillor Neal and Councillor Gates on this matter. Councillor Martin understands he's on a bit of a double-edged sword here, but I encourage him to go have that conversation. Be careful about setting expectations because in the end, 8 votes decides a new planning scheme, so be careful of expectations. But I will make the offer to all councillors that if you've got another area, like Councillor Neal alluded to, where you would like to be able to publicly signal that you have a focus there and you are listening to the community and you want to have that chat, we can do more of this. It is only calling out something that's in the work program anyway. So if you want to have that discussion, please have that with me. We can look for opportunities to include in the future. I'll close debate. We'll take a vote on the matter. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. Item 6.7, last one for the day. I think we've been presented this one on more than one occasion, so I'm hoping we can go straight to questions. Yep. Very good. Okay, so is there questions for officers on 6.7 first? Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. My question, it relates to a few councillors, Councillor Marshall, and I think yourself, Councillor Hamill, on Friday received a petition from some local residents around this item today, seeking that we consider the petition here at the committee, and not proceeding. So for me, that's unusual, because I thought the process was that petitions must go to council. So I'm just seeking confirmation or advice here. Given we've got that petition on Friday afternoon, I don't believe it's been vetted yet. Are we able to consider those petition?
Don't do it very often, but we can go to the city secretary for a response to this one, I guess.
Through you, Chair. The petition must be received by council first before it's dealt with by a committee. So we will need to wait until the petition is received by council.
So for clarity, could we preempt any of that, council? We can't preempt the actions of that petition.
Sorry, through the Chair, you could potentially preempt some of it and then not receive the petition because it's been dealt with at committee. But yeah, you can't receive the petition at committee.
Yeah. And so in relation to this, Chair, maybe one for yourself or for officers, because we've already had this come to council, we've already resolved. So I'm just seeking, like, the today here, is there any further decision, or essentially is this procedural?
Who would like to answer that? I'm happy to, but George, do you want to answer it?
Through the Chair, it's more procedural. We've already sent it to the state seeking adoption, and Council had resolved to send it to the state. The policy position hasn't changed. Council can choose not to progress with the adoption if that was a decision they want to make, but we're at the point that that's the only two options that we've got. We either proceed or we choose not to proceed at this point in time.
Any further questions for councillors? Oh, sorry, for councillors. Councillor Gates, questions for officers,
just
maybe.
wondering if we could have a broad understanding of what the concern is before we actually adopt.
Councillor Martin, do you want to outline your understanding of what the concern raised in the petition is?
There was a few matters raised, but it was Friday afternoon, so we haven't had much time to consider, and it hadn't been through the council process. But essentially, there are residents along Christine Avenue that Councillor Marsh and I share. Residents along there that has road widening overlay at a significant level. It transects almost up to half of some properties. And whilst we've had engagement with some of those residents, there's the have you say, there's been the sessions, and there's been feedback. The petition that was received was to not approve this today, and that further consultation be engaged with landowners, discussing a range of factors like impacts to property values, and essentially that it not proceed. And I wonder if Councillor Marshall wants to add anything else.
Councillor Marshall, did you have anything additional to contribute?
Yeah, I guess, and Chair, through you, one of the biggest, I think, issues with this road has just been there's no definitive line in the sand as to how much of their property's been taken up. And so there's a lot of confusion that some maps will say something and the residents feel there'll be a map that shows just through the front yard other areas. And I think we've had meetings with officers and some of these residents about that there's a little bit of, I guess, confusion as to how much of the properties are taken up. The other, I guess, issue is that because it's been said that it's 20 years away before there's trunk infrastructure done on this road, that people feel for 20 years now, they either stay there and in 20 years' time get very little for their property, or they sell now, and a few people are saying, well, we don't want to sell now. So I think there's multiple issues, as Councillor Martin said, but I feel like it's the confusion where the biggest issues lay.
Righto. So we're back to questions for officers. I'm at Councillor Young first, and I'll come back to Councillor Patterson.
Thanks, Chair. Is there a timeliness aspect to adoption of this recommendation?
Through the Chair, it's tied up with two of our other amendments, being Yatla and the minor, which both remain starred today. Now, I do believe there are some time constraints with the Yatla amendment, so we do have to proceed with Yatla and the minor. If we weren't to proceed with this today, it does create additional work for the city planning team in terms of creating new versions.
Follow up, Councillor Young?
No, not as a question, thank you.
Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Chair, through you. And it's a similar question, and I just want to make sure I've got clarity on it. So those other updates and amendments, can they stand by themselves? Like, is there any vital reason, given this petition standing here now, does it disrupt things too much if we hold on a bit?
They can be done as separate. We can create new versions and just take forward Yatla and the minor, but it does ultimately create a lot more work.
Sorry, I can't hear. Sorry, say it again.
But it does ultimately create a lot more work for our team. And also, as I said previously, with this road widening amendment, we're at the point where the policy position can't change. It's either adopt or not adopt.
Okay. So may I ask, follow up, so what does a lot more work for your team look like?
In terms of a lot more work, when we create a new version of the scheme, we have to do a whole new version. So it's changing everything from all the figures and updating, potentially page numbers, all the little notes around the effective date that the scheme has been versioned. It requires CEO sign-off both times. So it does create a reasonable...
Administrative...
Correct.
Editing and then a CEO sign-off.
Correct.
Councillor Gates, you're up next.
I've just answered my own question.
Very good. Councillor Young.
You're so clever.
So in the interests of responding to the concerns of those people, I don't know who they might be or how many, but have they been given a robust opportunity to respond to Council's policy position?
So my understanding is that from my quick read, I recognise most of the petitioners' names as people who put formal submissions in during the public notification process for this amendment. And I believe a lot of them have had one-on-one chats with city officers. That's my understanding. Maybe an officer would like to put something on the public record to that accord.
Thanks, Chair.
Yep.
Themes and... Oh, sorry.
You're on now.
What have I done wrong? Oh, sorry. Thank you. A lot of the same themes that we've heard through the formal public consultation.
So this item has been floating around for a couple of years now. It has been through all the statutory notification process. There was a lot of owners offered one-on-one opportunities.
Sorry.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, Mr. Prassar is here. He may be able to answer that. We wouldn't have a detailed, Mr. Prassar, I'm guessing the answer to that is that we wouldn't be at detailed designing stage yet to be able to say exactly how much we would need, hence why we normally go for a little bit more to make sure we've got the flexibility that we don't have to come back for a second bite in the future.
The level of consultation. I did see that the consultation was held over about a month, but did it include the divisional councillor, and to what extent was that consultation undertaken rather than, was it just GC have your say, or how was it done?
So Nick may not be able to answer that part, but he can answer my question.
I can answer the first question through the Chair. So with regards to the mapping, it's all based on what we call corridor planning, so it's still very high level planning.
So they would have seen a line through their property.
There is a line through the properties.
The greatest.
But there is a note saying that the property owner will need to contact the transport planning area of council to get a more definitive parameters of what the impact is. These change all the time. They could be a little bit more, a little bit less, depending on what level of maturity we have with our planning. Obviously, most of these projects don't have any detailed design done, but we do have some intelligence about what we need. It's quite logical that a 20-metre wide road reserve cannot fit in 4 lanes for traffic or any other multimodal corridors that we need. It's quite logical that we would need to have some land take from the adjacent properties. So the mapping is not definitive, but it still provides quite a good level of intelligence about what footprint we require.
And then could we answer Councillor Gates' question about I know there actually would have been endorsement of the consultation report and this in the past and the findings, but can we give Councillor Gates a little bit more detail on the level of consultation and the level of divisional councillor input and stakeholder engagement?
Yeah, through the chair, Luke and I can probably tag team because he'll correct me if I'm wrong. There was obviously the statutory consultation that was undertaken, and through that there were talk to the planner sessions. So residents were able to come in and have one-on-one consultation with our planners and I believe the transport team. The team has also assisted the local area councillors affected by this overlay with some additional correspondence and additional meetings to be able to assist trying to provide that feedback to affected residents.
So all of the affected residents were notified individually, were they?
That's correct. Through the statutory process, they would have all been notified.
Do we know how many that was along Christine Avenue?
Through the chair, I think over 800. So even where it was an apartment, we wrote a letter to everyone in the apartment, even if a bit of common property was affected. So yeah, that's over and above. I think normally you just need to do an ad in the paper, but we chose to write to everyone who was affected, so they were aware. And yeah, just to add, I guess we had 4 talk to planner events where we're out in the public and people could come to us. So we tried our best to go over and above, and tried to listen and respond as best we could.
Thank you.
Question, Councillor Doran?
I'm proposing a change recommendation.
Okay, I'm happy to see what the change is.
I just emailed 3 seconds ago.
Yep.
Slightly different words. Sorry, you wouldn't have it just yet, but essentially changes number 5 to the officers report back to council in 2 years regarding the effectiveness of the amendment and any early acquisition or compensation. So they've got that there. I don't seek to change the recommendation, just to build upon it. And I've spoken to city officers about this prior to today, and I'll talk to when I get a chance.
Do you wish to move, or would you like me to, and you can take it as a second?
Sure.
Cool. So I'm happy to move the item, and Councillor Doran's happy to second. We'll just wait for number 5 to be updated. Sounds like a question for you, Councillor Doran, what your intent is there.
Yeah, I think, Councillor Young, this one will talk to, the intent is about things like the hardship requests, acquisitions, development assessments, the efficiency, but also the unintended consequences, and if there has been any for something like this. It's not to stop it. It's not to, it's not.
What is the amendment?
That would be the road widening major amendment, the new road widening overlay, which was an amendment to the city plan.
Oh, but that's the whole city.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, sorry. We just changed it to the new road widening overlay. To finish the answer to Councillor Young, Chair, I don't seek to change the amendment or the widening overlay. I'm just seeking that I think that there's a good opportunity to monitor its effectiveness and see whether or not there's any impacts that maybe haven't been considered. It's quite consequential. It makes sense to me that this is proposed by the city to protect the corridor, but I think it's timely to have a check-in at some point.
Cool. So I'm happy to move that, and Councillor Doran's happy to second. Councillor Martin?
Yeah, just a question, Chair, and it sort of relates both to this petition and to Councillor Doran talking about compensation and effectiveness. If I could ask the question, the primary objection of this petition was the loss of property value, in that in the interim between now and when actually trunk infrastructure goes in, that if a seller, if they wanted to sell their home, that they would be impacted, and they want to sell it on the open market, they would be impacted. It wouldn't sell for as much. So I suppose, and they say no written assurance has been given to the city that they'll be compensated. I suppose if they sell it on the open market, it is the open market. My question is, if they are selling in this corridor, would it not be practical for the city to enter into engagement with this road widening? Or is that not on the cards and they are in the open market? And if they are achieving lower figures, how does that compensation potentially work?
I think Mr. Prassar is probably best placed to explain the early purchase opportunities and how that works.
Through the chair, so we actively do purchase properties that become for sale in the open market. We recently purchased one up at Pimpamar, where we knew that we needed the land for intersection upgrade. It's quite simple, much easier to purchase a property that's for sale. Where a property owner who is affected by the road widening overlay is having difficulty, financial hardship, or having difficulty in selling their property, because of the road widening overlay, they can make a representation to council about purchasing their property, but they do need to demonstrate hardship, and that if council was to consider that acquisition, it would need to obviously be approved through the normal protocols, but it would be done through negotiation. Through the value of it, we would get our own independent valuation, and it would be done like we normally do when we acquire properties. So it's done based on market rates and an independent valuation. So it's all through negotiation. It won't be a resumption.
Any further questions before I open up debate? So I'm just going to open by saying that, like the last time this came to committee, I want to acknowledge that we are talking about people's properties, and while in most circumstances, because this report does cover hundreds of properties right across the city, from the very north to the very south and everywhere else in between, in most of those circumstances, we are talking about a very minor possible acquisition, sometimes down to 100 mil, sometimes a few hundred mil, a strip out the front. I do want to acknowledge that in the Christine Avenue section, we are definitely talking about larger sections that would have a very different impact, and I appreciate that both Councillor Martin and Councillor Marshall have had every opportunity raised a focus to that. That said, this is really important work, and the reason it's here is because if we don't have this overlay, and if people don't have clarity of where these corridors are, then we end up in a really difficult position where developments occur, and instead of just having to possibly buy a little bit of land in the future, you're having to buy a whole building and knock it down to do the transport planning and the other network planning in the future. So this corridor, identifying these corridors, protecting these corridors is critical to the future planning for our city. I think I'm a fairly strong advocate and made it on the record a lot of time that I'd like to see more of this being done, not just for roads, intersections and sewer networks, but for the public transport corridors of the future. I'd much prefer to have an overlay there that may sit there for 10, 20, 30 years. That's better than a building getting built and either the corridor being lost as an opportunity forever or having to take out entire buildings, which is something I think we'd all agree we want to not see happen. So very pleased that we've taken this approach. It will make delivery of important upgrades in the future a lot easier, because as we have a very live example up in my neck of the woods at the moment, when you're trying to buy skinny pieces of land, you'd think it'd be a quick process, and 12 months later, you're having to write letters to ministers to resume little bits of land to get a critical intersection safety upgrade going, and we don't want to be in that position. This enables transparency, so there's nothing hidden here. This is a public-facing overlay. Everyone can see this. Existing owners and potential owners, communities can see this and understand what is proposed in the areas. And importantly, if any of these sites have an application lodged, we can ensure that protection of the land we need for the future is there. So they're all the positives. It's why I absolutely support this today and believe we should take the next step in this process. It doesn't stop the ability for the city and the residents on Christine Avenue who have put the petition in to continue to talk about how we may be able to either allay those concerns further or start to open up the conversation for those that maybe just want to get out now. They're all options on the table, but I really do strongly recommend to committee that we take the step forward on this today, and that we encourage Nick and his team to be looking at the next lot of corridors, especially for those critical east-west public transport corridors, in alignment and partnership with the state government to get those corridors protected as well, so we can not have that problem in the future. Speaker against the motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Chair. And obviously I'm not on this committee, but I just felt the need just to speak against it. I completely agree with your sentiments, and in, I guess, my division, we've also got Marquerie Street where this wasn't done, and that had been done prior, that would have been a nice east-west corridor. I guess my biggest concern, but involves the people that want to stay living in these locations, and I'll give you two examples, which I said that I would speak to. because the overlay will prevent development applications, and this goes through the front of people's properties, there is 2 families that I know of that wanted to build a pool in the front of their property. They've been told that it's 20 years away until this trunk infrastructure is done. Their kids will have moved out of home. They probably won't be living there, but they can't build a pool for their kids to go in for something that might happen in 20 years' time. That was one, I guess, I understand that we need to get this right, and that was one where I think a more definitive, exact location of that line would allow them to be able to make those decisions. The other one is, and again, it involves the buyback, but was I guess a couple that are a little bit older and we're looking at hopefully trying to cash in on the sale of their place in the next 10 to 15 years. They're not ready to sign and I guess sell now. Their concern was in 10 to 15 years' time, they won't get the money that they could have got if they were one street back, or if they were one street a little bit east or west where there wasn't this overlay, and so they're worried that their retirement nest egg's affected if they sell now. They don't want to move now, but if they do move in the future, they won't get as much money. So I desperately feel for those residents. I understand from a greater city perspective and using the Markerry Street that the overlays are needed, but I just really feel for these families in this location. Both Councillor Martin and I have sat with most of them, and I appreciate the officers have sat with us, and Brett Bass has sat with us on a couple of occasions, but I just think there's no winners here, and I really want to speak up for those people that are I guess potentially losing.
Chairman, a point of clarification. Councillor Martin, I don't think that those people are prohibited from going ahead with their pool construction. Officers might give their opinion on that, but I don't believe that would stop them from doing any building works outside of that line. It's just that they would lose that investment ultimately.
So, only because it's been raised as a very contextual example, if Mr. Prassar is able to answer that, is it that it's an absolute ban, or is it a case of that we may not, we may not pay them for the value of that pool in the future, that it's them accepting that it's sacrificial? Are you able to answer that?
Through the chair, I just want to clarify the first statement when Councillor Marshall said people can't make a development application. This is not preventing people from making a development application. They can. What this tool does, it provides us with the head of power to be able to make sure that the future transport corridor is preserved. So they can still put in a development application. So that's the first point of clarification. With regards to swimming pools and sheds and things like that, they will still need a development permit. Okay, and building certifiers do use the city plan to inform their decisions, and they will be using this road widening overlay as part of making a decision. So preference is that land that is we see as identified as required for a future transport corridor is kept free. It doesn't mean people can, they can still use that land for recreation, for a garden, for storage, but any permanent structure, including a swimming pool on that part of the land, really will prevent the future the integrity of the future transport corridor. So they can still use their property in their current form. They can still lodge a development application, but it would be, the whole idea is to keep that piece of land free and unencumbered from any permanent structures.
So, Nick, if we could maybe just be a little bit more blunt in clarifying that it doesn't prohibit development, so it doesn't prohibit it, but it may be that we would turn around and say, well, you were aware the overlay was there, you spent X money on a pool, we're not going to reimburse you for that infrastructure for that you built on your own property at that stage.
That is correct. I'm not quite sure if a swimming pool requires a building permit. That's not my...
Anyway, I think Councillor Marshall gets the idea, and it's why my close was just going to be to say that those particular residents, because I think it really is a very small section out of this whole report, it's a very specific set, continuing those conversations, but endorsing this today is still a step forward. Councillor Marshall, did you get a chance to finish then? I can't remember. That's cool. Councillor Martin, I'm in a particularly good mood today, so if you wish to speak to it as well, I'll allow it.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to contribute. I just want to acknowledge those affected residents. Look, it's a whole of city road widening overlay, but particularly on Christine Avenue, I think Councillor Marsh and I particularly have had some challenges, and would agree. You know, I went to every single pop-up, was trying to make myself available with every single resident. I feel for the petition that we received on Friday that it can't, we can't lawfully consider it here. It's not the process. But what I would say is the petition was seeking to halt and undertake more consultation. I know the city has done that. So it's really about the circumstances of the border piece of land, and now this widening is impacting that dream. But that widening where it goes two lanes to single lane on Christine Avenue should have been done 10, 20 years ago. It will be far worse in 10, 20 years in the future. So it is best to put in now so we can signal to the community about that future intent. I would say most of their objections are around personal impacts to property and values, and it's great to hear that the city is open to negotiation and that there's not, if they are genuinely impacted, that there is avenues there. So I would encourage those that have signed this petition or those community to reach out and help facilitate with officers to undertake that. So I absolutely acknowledge the kind of pain around this widening, but for the greater city good and transport corridors, understand why today, adopt or not adopt, I can't not adopt on the basis of how this has unfolded.
Councillor Martin, thank you for that. I'm just going to close by again making the call that to Nick and the team, more of this is good, more corridor identification and protection is good, and the sooner that in partnership with the state government we can identify all of the critical public transport corridors for the city's future and protect them for the better as well. Debate is closed. We'll take the vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried unanimous. Councillors, by my read, that brings us to the end of items today. I close the meeting at 12:35.